What is up, guys? The time has finally come to completely put to bed 2024. All of my end of the year ranking videos have been completed except for one. And as tradition over the last couple of years, I think this is the third year I've done this, we're going to rank every single new release film that I saw in the calendar year of the previous year. And this year, or excuse me, last year, 2024, I was able to watch 130 films, which to date is the most new release films that I have ever watched in a year. So who knows what this number is going to be next year. But there are so many movies to get through. Some of them I'm going to talk about a little bit more than others. A number of them, mainly my top 10, my bottom 10, a few in the middle, I've talked about numerous times just over the past couple of days in these end of the year rankings. So if you want my more in-depth thoughts on these movies, there's a playlist up here of all of my 2024 new release reviews. So the ones that I did full reviews for will be in here. And then there's also going to be a playlist that I'll put up here as well for all of my end of the month wrap-up videos, of which I did 11. January, I barely saw anything. So February through December, I wrapped up all of the new releases that I saw and got pretty in-depth with all of them. And with that said, the only other thing that I will let you know is that because of the fact that I go to a lot of film festivals, it creates this very odd situation where a number of films I'm able to see at these festivals don't actually get released wide until the following year. So movies like Last Stop in Yuma County and Strange Darling are going to feel like giant omissions on this list. I actually ranked them in my list last year, and there's probably going to be a handful of movies that I have in this year's list that some of you guys won't be able to see until 2025. It's just the nature of the beast. I think it's better for me to talk about them while they're fresh versus waiting an entire calendar year. So that's the way that I'm doing it. And now with all of that down, let's kick this bitch off. All 130 fucking new releases that I saw in 2024. Let's do this. Coming in at 130, the worst film that I saw last year by quite a bit is The Mousetrap. This is yet another group of people who are trying to exploit public domain laws to have controversial slasher takes of our childhood favorite cartoon characters. The group that did Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey have carried on to do a number of other films that one of which is definitely better than the first one. The next one I'm actually going to be watching later tonight, and I've heard nothing but good things about. Somehow The Mousetrap, for as much as I strongly disliked Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, The Mousetrap is even worse because there is nothing of value in this film. I'm not going to list through all of the reasons why I detest this thing, but I just hate what it stands for. I hate the cynical nature of just trying to crap something out and put a evil Disney skin on it to try to get some controversy dollars. Luckily, this film did not make it into theaters. It did not make it into Fathom events, so it didn't walk away with a giant payday. It just got dumped on streaming where it absolutely belongs. But even with this one film not having anywhere near a success story, get ready for a ton of other ones. There's going to be even more Steamboat Willie movies. There's going to be even more Popeye movies. Maybe some of them will be good. Maybe some of them will have some fun. And if nothing else, be a guilty pleasure experience. But this one represents the absolute worst of what we can expect from this trend. Number 129, Madam Web, the absolute most cynical piece of garbage out of a major studio that cost a whole lot of money in the year of 2024. Sony took an absolute shit on the comic book movie genre this year, and Madam Web was the stinkiest part of it. Madam Web is a movie that had no point to exist. These are characters that nobody, even the biggest Spider-Man fans, were asking for a standalone film, and the people that put it together didn't give even a flying fuck to make this thing somewhat of a fun concept. It was just, let's put something out there, let's tease it as being a part of Spider-Man's universe, so maybe a few people will be tricked into going to see it, and it's just an incompetent mess. There's ADR all over the place. It was reshot and rewritten all over the place. It's no coherence whatsoever. It's comically bad with the story and the dialogue that they did leave in here, even after all of the edits and the reshoots. So this represents the worst of studio filmmaking in 2024 at 129. Number 128 is Tarot. This is a PG-13 curse horror film. It's a movie that we've seen a dozen times, most notably The Bye-Bye Man. Not a movie that a lot of us have very fond memories of. All the kills are off screen. None of the characters are interesting. And if you're somebody who has never seen horror before, you might have a good time with this one. If you're somebody who has seen more than 2 horror films, you're not going to have a good time with this whatsoever because there's just nothing here to enjoy. 127, The Strangers Chapter 1, a kickoff to a new trilogy that's directed by Renny Harlin. I had a little bit of hope for this because I am a Renny Harlin fan, but for whatever reason, they decided to make this first chapter a soft remake of the original film, which I'm on an island of being not so much of a fan of that film in and of itself, and it's a significantly better version of this story than what we got in Chapter 1. So if the first two Strangers films weren't infuriating enough for just absolutely maddeningly stupid character decisions, Strangers Chapter 1 said, hold my beer. Number 126 is Dear Santa. This represents everything that is terrible about the majority of straight-to-streaming movies nowadays, as well as a lot of modern holiday movies. We have not had a holiday classic, a bona fide classic, in a very long time, and mostly what we have gotten is a lot of these straight-to-streaming movies like this. I love Jack Black. It takes a lot to make me dislike what he is doing in a movie, but they damn sure did it here. I don't know what the hell they were going for. It's not funny, it's not clever, it's not interesting, and out of nowhere they have this really dark, depressing gut punch that they attempt in the story that feels misplaced in this movie and just leaves you with an absolute bad taste in your mouth. Number 125 kicks off our Blumhouse Blunder trilogy with Afraid. This is the latest evil AI movie. You have Super Alexa in this movie that is fixated on taking care of this family and making their lives easier and wonderful, and eventually just starts to go psycho in its own psychotic way of trying to meet those goals. So it's a movie that could have had some interesting ideas, especially with AI and the evil of it being such a topic of discussion over the last year or so, but what they give you here is just an absolute generic, boring, and pointless take on that story. 124 continues the Blumhouse Blunder trilogy with Night Swim. Does a evil swimming pool sound interesting to you? If so, I would still say to watch something else, because this is not it. 123 closes out this trilogy with Imaginary, the one of this trilogy that actually had some potential, something you could do that's interesting here, but they didn't have near the budget or the creativity to pull it off. Starts as kind of like a Child's Play take with an imaginary friend twist, and by the third act, when this is actually supposed to be paid off with this imaginary world and the looks and the designs of these imaginary friend creatures, it just feels like they ran out of money and nobody truly gave a fuck. 122. One question for you. Did anybody ask for a remake to Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead? Here's a second question for you. Did anybody ask for a version of this story that removes all of the charm and all of the actual lessons learned by these characters and replace all of the genuinely great humor with race jokes? No? Nobody? Okay, cool. Moving on. 121, we have Megalopolis, a movie that certainly is ambitious, certainly feels like somebody that had a vision for something, but for as much as we all love Francis Ford Coppola, I don't know what the hell he was going for here. I can't get too mad at him because the fact that he put his own money up for this, he put his money where his mouth is, but this is a movie that is made for just two people on Earth, Francis Ford Coppola and my buddy Joey Sasso. I'm neither, so I didn't enjoy it. Number 120 is Kraven the Hunter. This is another film that felt like it should have been in my bottom 10 because it is yet another example of Sony just taking a giant shit on the comic book genre, but it barely got edged out because I did get a tiny bit of so bad that it's good enjoyment out of this. Not a lot, but a little bit. This is something that, just like with Madam Web, nobody was really asking for. Anybody that wants to see Kraven the Hunter, which are a lot of Spider-Man fans, wants to see him in a movie with Spider-Man, not a bullshit origin story that basically just amounts to telling you how he got his fucking jacket. 119 is Blackout. This is a very low-budget independent horror film that is a take on werewolves. I don't remember the name of the director, but he's very well regarded in the horror community. But unfortunately, this was my first taste of his work, and I did not enjoy this at all. It just felt like a very repetitive first two acts and then a third act that didn't pay off anything with the werewolf stuff that I was hoping that it would. So by the end of it, this unfortunately is probably my least favorite film that I've ever seen at a festival. 118 is Sister Midnight. I saw this at Fantastic Fest and it was my least favorite of this year's festival. It's just a really bizarre movie about an Indian girl that has an arranged marriage, and in the frustrations of trying to make this marriage work with somebody that she barely knows, some things inside of her that go a little bit more towards the horror genre, but not quite enough for me to even consider it a horror film, start to get awakened in her. But it was a very, very deliberately paced movie that The payoffs just didn't feel like they were strong enough, and by the end, I really didn't feel like I grasped what they were going for. It just kind of left me puzzled. 117, hashtag AMFAD, also known as All My Friends Are Dead. I gave this a shot because I'm a fan of Marcus Dunstan's work, love The Collector, I enjoy what he does with the Saw franchise for the most part, and this film really let me down. It kind of feels like the Saw for the TikTok generation, and there could have been some cool things to be done with that. I do think that there were some creative ideas for the kills, but when you CGI to hell the entire thing, I don't get the carnage candy that I want. I didn't enjoy the characters. And when you have JoJo Siwa as your main build actress here, you pretty much know what movie you're in store for. 116, Don't Mess with Grandma. This is a to-be original that I saw at Fantastic Fest. It's got Michael Jai White, and it's a action comedy where he's essentially hanging out with his grandma. People are trying to break into her house, and so he's trying to dispatch of all of the burglars while not trying to disturb his grandmother. Sounded like a concept that could have been a really fun time if you have Michael Jai White really beating the living piss out of a lot of people, but it just relegates to a lot of very cheaply made slapstick kind of humor that I didn't think was funny. I didn't think any of the action sequences are fun, and completely wasted Michael Jai White's talents as an action hero. So a movie that just didn't really hit on any level. 115 is Spaceman. Now, I respect what they were trying to go for with this movie. It's yet another really good performance from Adam Sandler. I do want to see more movies like this from him, but this one was just bizarre, and honestly, it just bored me all to hell. So while it is more quality filmmaking than a number of films that I have above it, I would rather rewatch those because this one just really failed to entertain me on any level. 114 is Wineville. This is an independently made horror film about a mother and a son that goes back to her childhood home, and a lot of childhood trauma starts to come back in bad memories, as well as some really creepy people that work at this winery. And while there was certainly some interesting gore and some very visceral horror going on with some of the kills going on here, it is a movie that is focused way too much on incest for me to really get entertained by it. I just kind of felt put off and uncomfortable with a lot of what they were exploring here. 113 is The Well. It's a movie that has a bit of an identity crisis. The half that is focused on Lauren Lavera, who is restoring this demonic painting, was really an interesting concept to me. The half with the clown makeup guy killing people and throwing them down the well didn't really do anything for me, and it took way too long throughout the movie for those two storylines to converge. So a movie that the sequel, if we get one, seems like it's going to go in an interesting direction, but this first movie didn't quite do it for me. 112, you got Nutcrackers. Pretty much see all of my thoughts on Dear Santa. You have a straight-to-streaming service movie that is focused on the Christmas holiday, that is starring a comedic actor that I love, and every bit of Christmas charm that they are searching for here, they absolutely failed to find. Coming in at 111 is Joker Folie à Deux, or Joker 2, for those of us that can't pronounce French too well. This is a movie that I think a lot of people have at the bottom of their list this year. It's a movie that actively angered a lot of people, and absolutely by design. This is just such a strange event where you have a sequel to a $1 billion plus film that was a massive success that won Oscars. And it seems like the people that made it are actively annoyed at those of us that actually made that film a $1 billion success. Why? I don't fucking know. But despite the fact that it's very well directed, it's very well acted, the cinematography is incredible, and there's really good artistry at play with the choreography and everything of these musical segments, even though I think the jukebox musical approach is a little strange and I'm not a musical fan, there's things to appreciate here. It's a well-made film technically, but the story that they're telling here feels like it absolutely ceases to have a point to exist. I've heard arguments of why it's a worthy follow-up, why it's really profound and important. I just don't get it. This entire thing reads to me like Todd Phillips and Joaquin Phoenix and a few other people just given a gigantic middle finger to fans of the Joker, to fans of the original film, and laughing all the way to the bank while they do it as they cash their multi-million-dollar checks. I just can't celebrate that. I don't get it. I don't like it. And I want to fucking stop talking about it. So luckily, this is the last time I'll have to talk about it. 110 is Trap, my most disappointing film of the year. M. Night Shyamalan is somebody who has given me a lot of films that I love, has given me a lot of films that I really don't like, and has disappointed me a number of times. But this felt like such an easy win. It was such a great premise with an actor here that I love, and I've been waiting to see him get a little bit of a resurgence, a little bit of a time to shine. And this movie, while having a really interesting premise and having some things that are entertaining in here, just sticks to absolute nonsensical bullshit. Way too much for me to enjoy this. It's not a movie that is zany and campy enough for me to throw away the rules of reality and just go along for the ride. It takes itself dead serious while throwing absolute bullshit at the wall and hoping all of it sticks, and none of it does. So it's just riddled with plot holes, and it's an absolute annoying film to watch because it just feels like it's actively insulting my intelligence from scene to scene to scene. 109 is Borderlands, yet another body to throw on top of the pile of bodies of poor video game adaptations. I don't know what happened with this one. Looks like another case of just studio meddling and way too many cooks in the kitchen. Eli Roth is a director that I do have a good time with. The writer of this is one of the guys that just brought us The Last of Us, and he's on record saying that the movie that he wrote and he signed up for is unrecognizable, and he actually petitioned to get his name stricken from the movie. So what you get here is a movie that has a visual style somewhat, but it just feels like a generic ripoff of Guardians of the Galaxy that is pushed to be PG-13 from a video game and from an original cut that very clearly was meant to be rated R. So it just ends up being yet another blunder of a video game adaptation. 108, we have Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scar Giver. I actually was a little more positive on the first half than a lot of people, and I certainly had the same issues as them, but I was intrigued enough. This second film absolutely took all of that away and actually made me like the first half less. I didn't even bother watching the director's cuts this year because I just had no more time or energy to give to this universe or to Zack Snyder in 2024. From the people that I know that did see it, said that it was a little bit better, but wasn't like this significant improvement on the level of the Zack Snyder's Justice League situation. And that really feels like what this entire Rebel Moon thing was. It was him and Netflix getting together, trying to manufacture that type of fan movement again. And man, did they fall on their face with this. So for somebody who has always been a fan and a pretty steady defender of Zack Snyder, this entire Rebel Moon debacle has seriously just left a bad taste in my mouth for the guy. So I really hope that whatever he does next is something smaller, something a little bit more simple, like the first couple of movies that he did, gets away from these like epic, huge 3-hour plus cuts and needing director's cuts and an ultimate cut. And he really feels like he's starting to get high on his own supply because of his very vapid fan base on the internet. And as somebody who is a genuine fan of him, I just find it to be a turnoff at this point. Just stop. Quit talking about how your rated R cuts are fucking deconstructing the PG-13 cuts and all that bullshit. Just make movies, man. You're a great visual director. Need a little bit of help in the writing department, if I'm going to be honest, but stop with this bullshit. Number 107, we have Bob Marley, One Love. When I go to see a biopic, it usually helps if I'm a big fan of that artist or if they just have a really fascinating story that I'm unfamiliar with. And I just didn't really get any out of this. I've never really been into reggae or into Bob Marley music. Obviously, I know a few of his songs. And they pretty much decide to focus this movie on one little piece of his life. After he becomes a bit of like this freedom fighter leading up to when there's hints that he's eventually going to die. So I just didn't find the story that they were telling to be that captivating. And it certainly didn't turn me into a Bob Marley fan. So just wasn't made for me. 106 is Time Cut. This is a film that came to Netflix, I believe, and it is basically the same type of movie as Totally Killer. Supposedly this was put into production before Totally Killer, so it's not like it was ripping it off, I guess, but it is the significantly less fun and less interesting version of this story of a teenage girl who goes back in time and tries to stop a slasher killer from seriously affecting her family. And I just didn't really enjoy where it went. Like by the third act, I thought that the reveals of the killer were extremely predictable. And then where they try to leave things off just leaves a lot of huge illogical questions going like, how exactly is that going to work? Please explain. So love Totally Killer, did not love Time Cut. 105 is Night Bitch, a movie that is very well made, that's probably going to be a critic darling for a lot of people this time of the year for award season, but I just did not understand what this movie was going for. I did not enjoy what it was going for. This is basically like a mother empowerment movie, if that makes sense. You have Amy Adams here as somebody who has had a child and she's basically stuck at home being the housewife, and she's very frustrated with that life and the repetition of it all. and she starts to lash out, and it visualizes all of that with her turning into a dog and literally showing her like eating out of a plate like a dog at a store. It's just bizarre. Amy Adams is great. She's always great. You can tell she dedicated herself to this role, but not for me. 104 is Gazer. This is a film that I don't think has been released yet. I saw it at Fantastic Fest, and yes, you'll hear me say that a lot in this video because a lot of films I see at those festivals. Gazer is a movie where you have a woman that's got some kind of a cognitive issue where she just like trails off if she doesn't focus, and so she'll lose time, but she witnesses a crime. So it's similar to other movies, other little premises that we've seen before. It was billed as like something very inspired by Taxi Driver. I think that kind of set my expectations too high because aside from grittiness, I really wouldn't bring that movie up to describe this. And so it just ended up being a film that was very slow. It was very deliberately paced. So if something like that sounds interesting to you and you don't mind a really slow burn type of version of that, check it out because it was well done. It just, at the time I saw it in the festival, was not the type of movie that I needed to be watching. So it just dragged too much for my taste. 103 is Beazle. This is a straight to streaming movie. It's essentially 3 stories across time about this house that has this witch inside of it called Beazle. And so it's kind of like a horror anthology type thing. And I thought the first 2 stories were pretty cool. I didn't really enjoy the third story or how it all wrapped up. Definitely some creepy images in here. So if you like anthologies, if you like found footage type movies, it's got a little bit of that flavor in there too. Check it out. It was interesting, just not something I'd rewatch. 102, you have Venom: The Last Dance. The one movie that Sony put out that I would say is almost tolerable. I mean, it kind of goes for what we've gotten so far in the Venom movies. So if you like the Venom movies, you'll probably like this one. For me, it felt like everything that would have been really fun to see in this one was relegated to like the last 15 minutes. And the rest of the movie is all just spinning its wheels, literally, with this really bizarre road trip. And so you still get some of the bromance moments. You still get a few cute lines, I guess, between Eddie and Venom, but just feels like an absolute waste for what's supposed to be like a big culmination of this trilogy. I say that because I don't really feel like there's a plan. There's just more Venom movies. But yeah, it's another Venom movie. Take that for what it is. 101 is the 4:30 movie. This is a new Kevin Smith film, and on paper, I should have loved this. Definitely did not love it, unfortunately. It was a big disappointment. This is a coming-of-age film that's semi-autobiographical of Kevin Smith. A bunch of high schoolers go off to the movie theater, spend an entire day there, and the main character is hooking up with the girl of his dreams for a date at the 4:30 movie. So it's him and his friends watching all of these fake movies and going through these hijinks at this theater. And that should be awesome. But I didn't find any of the characters to be that likable or funny, especially. I didn't laugh at any of the jokes here. I found all of the referential humor, like all of the meta movie humor, to be very on the nose and not all that clever. And even the fake movies that we're watching, I didn't find to be all that entertaining. So some people love this. A lot of people said this is best movie in years, and I wish that I could see what they saw. I'm envious of that experience. This just did not work for me. 100, we have The Crow, a very ill-advised remake, we'll just put it that way. When you have a movie that has such a legacy, not only as a cult classic, but also as almost like a memorial for the lead actor himself and Brandon Lee, probably shouldn't go and remake that movie as directly as they did. There's a reason why this thing has felt like it's cursed for the last decade or more. It's gone through like 6 different iterations of different directors and different actors, and we finally landed on this one with Bill Skarsgård, and he was certainly an exciting casting choice because I really like what that guy can do, and I'd like to see him succeed with something like this, like an action horror flick. But they just really did everything wrong. It felt like they did not understand at all what we loved about that original movie and why almost none of us like any of the sequels, which are kind of like soft remakes in and of themselves. First of all, why do you have to call him Eric Draven when all these movies have the same story? Like, all of the sequels aren't Eric Draven, but it's the same basic setup. You have a tragic death, you have a lost love, and you have somebody that comes back for revenge. You can call him anything and not step on the toes of Crow fans. So, mistake number 1. Number 2, they focus the entire first half of this film on this romance that's supposed to like be this all-encompassing romance, this symbol of love that's going to go past the bounds of the afterlife. and you don't give a fuck about these two characters. You only got to see the romance in the original Crow for like that much and in a flashback, and we cared more and bought more into that than you do at this film that spends about half of its runtime on that. And it's because you have essentially two broken junkies having like a weekend fling that seem like incredibly broken people in a very toxic relationship. It's not something that you're like getting a positive vibe off of at all. So another epic failure on their part. And then you have what could have been the saving grace of this movie, which was the action scenes, one of which was actually pretty entertaining, very in the vein of John Wick, which is kind of like the template for what we want from action films right now. And they only have one. They have one action sequence and another one that's like a quick little shootout in a car. If you would have had way more of that in this film, despite the blunders that I just described, it would have at least been entertaining. But it just ends up being a movie that disappoints you on every single level and teaches us the lesson that they should have already learned of why you don't remake The Crow. Number 99 is The Watchers. This is directed by M. Night Shyamalan's daughter. It's a directorial debut. Very similar in style and in approach to her father. He's supposedly a producer. I have a suspicion he did a lot more because it's just way too similar in positive and negative to his work. Another thing that's like a cool concept, you have these people that are locked up in this building in the middle of the woods, and these creatures come and watch them at night, supposedly, and you have characters that start to wonder if they believe that or not. But the more answers that we give, the more that it progresses into the third act where things are going to start to come to a head. It just raises a lot of questions. Some things are absolute bullshit that get brought up, and it goes much more for like a fantasy edge than a horror edge, and I'm not a big fantasy guy. I'm a big horror guy. So it was interesting, but certainly not something that I loved, and certainly not something I'd probably ever watch again. 98 is The Coffee Table. This actually played at last year's Fantastic Fest, but I didn't really have any idea what it was, didn't hear anything about it, so I didn't see it. And then a lot of my friends know, and a lot of my viewers know, because I've talked about it numerous times, like what my one emotional trigger is. What's the one thing that can happen in a movie that if it's done in a certain way, it can absolutely turn my stomach, put me in a very dark place, and make me not enjoy your film whatsoever, no matter how good it is on a quality standpoint. And my buddy Rudy did not know this about me. So he saw this movie and then texted me one night and said, dude, you've got to watch The Coffee Table. Like, I'm not even going to tell you anything about it, but like it's blowing up on TikTok. If you review it, it's probably going to get a ton of views. Like this movie is going to be talked about a lot. You got to check it out. And I was like, all right. Like I remember that being at the festival. I guess I'll check it out. And without spoiling things, like 7 to 10 minutes into this movie, something so shocking and dark and bleak happens. And my stomach just felt like a rock. And I was like, oh, Rudy, you son of a bitch.
Take a big step back and literally fuck your own face!
I forgave him because he didn't know, but I definitely called and gave him some shit for a little bit. Nonetheless, it's a movie that's a very black comedy, like pitch black comedy. It's not a horror film or anything like that. It deals with some very dark subject matter, but you have a situation where something very horrible happens, somebody's trying to conceal it, and the more people that get involved, the more ridiculous and uncomfortably humorous it starts to get. I understand why some people would love this, but for me, it does that thing that just turns me. It does it in a way that's intended to turn me. And so I just spent the entire time watching the movie just dreading what I was watching. So yeah, not a movie for me. 97, we have Little Bites, another film I saw at this year's Fantastic Fest. It's directed by Spider One, and it is an interesting concept, but executed not so well. A woman is a vampire in her basement, and she allows it to take little bites of her, and she's essentially just feeding this thing and trying to keep her daughter at bay. And so the whole thing is kind of like a allegory for a toxic relationship, like a woman who's stuck with a toxic husband or a toxic boyfriend is trying to save her kid from it. And so this is just one of those movies where the surface level storyline and the allegorical, metaphorical storyline never really come together all that well. And by the end of it especially, it just left me puzzled and confused. So could have been really interesting, but just didn't come together. 96 is I Saw the TV Glow. Certainly an interesting concept, certainly executed in a way that is memorable, that is effective, trying to give the experience of what it's like to be somebody who has gender dysphoria. I think that the creativity at play here is commendable, but it's a very painfully slow and redundant movie. They basically make their point in the first act, and the second act and third act is just kind of repeating what they said in the first act. Some people found that to be a very compounded experience, and it just got all the more horrifying as you went in. I just got extremely impatient with it and was waiting for something to happen to reward me going through this runtime and being extremely patient with the film. And by the end of it, that patience was not rewarded. So a movie that I can respect, but would never watch again. 95 is Baby Girl, another movie that a lot of people this year are just going all nuts about, especially Nicole Kidman, wanting to give it all the awards. And much like Night Bits, it's just not a movie for me. I'm not really into affair movies. You know, some are more entertaining than others, but this one is just very bizarre. I kind of like the fact that it's focused on a character that's just an absolute pervert. She's an absolute freak, and her husband does not really satisfy the freak in her, so she has to get a younger guy to do it. I thought that was somewhat entertaining, but it's just really bizarre. Like, she just wants to be dominated by this guy, and the way that they do that with her, you know, lapping milk out of a saucer on the ground and stuff, it was just off-putting. So me and my wife watched this, and she's like, why the fuck did you pick this movie? And I didn't have an answer for her. I guess I'm a freak too. 94 is Dead Male. I saw this at the Overlook Film Festival. I'm not sure if it's been released yet or not, but it was an interesting movie that it was just very quirky. Maybe a little too quirky for my taste. You have a guy that has been kidnapped, and he's able to get like a message of requiring help with like the address or whatever out into the mailbox, but it doesn't have an address, doesn't have a return address or anything. And so it ends up into the dead mail sector of the post office, which is where they don't know where this thing is. And somebody's actually an investigator that tries to figure out the origin or the destination of a package. And so it's kind of like a mystery where you're following this dead male investigator trying to put the pieces together that's eventually going to be breadcrumbs led to this kidnapping scenario. So very cool premise. And certainly a chunk of the movie was very intriguing, very tense. It was captivating, but again, very quirky, very off kilter with its tone and its humor and its characters. And so there's going to be people that really love it. In fact, the group that I was in that we saw this, it was basically split. You had people that were like, man, that was really cool and interesting. And then you had me and a few others that were like, that was really fucking weird and bizarre. I don't know if I like that or not. 93, you got The Rule of Jenny Penn, another film that I saw at Fantastic Fest this year that I, again, don't think has been released yet. I think this is going to be a 2025 film. And you have John Lithgow and you have Jeffrey Rush that are essentially in a battle of wills. Jeffrey Rush is like a really harsh judge who has a stroke, gets put into an assisted living facility. And after he is there, he realizes that John Lithgow is this guy that walks around with a puppet on his hand, is actually like an absolute psycho that not only tortures and torments other people in this assisted living facility, but actually kills some of them. So again, really interesting premise, but would have been a fantastic short film that feels like it's stretched out to feature length. Two great performances, two people that are really fun to see square off in this like mental battle, but a film that just drags. Again, very quirky with the performances and the tone here, and even some of the things that John Lithgow is doing. And it just feels like it really takes a long time to get to where things are really ramped up and interesting and kicked into fifth gear. 92, Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey 2. To say less, I was not a fan of the first film. Was surprised how much better the second film was. Still couldn't completely get to a positive review because I still felt like the premise of this movie should be a lot more comedic and a lot more fun than it was. But I enjoyed the hike in budget. There was much better gore. There was much better practical makeup and practical masks and creature designs going on with these characters. I enjoyed the fact they all kind of had their own personalities. Christopher Robin was a lot more enjoyable of a character here. I think that after a couple more movies, maybe even by the next one, I think they're going to find their tone for this universe, and I might actually start to really enjoy them. But this one, much better, still not quite there for me. 91, you have New Life, a film that I saw at Overlook Film Festival, and this is essentially about a woman who is on the run. She's just kind of traveling the U.S., and the government is hunting her because they believe that she is infected and spreading this virus. And the person who is in charge of hunting her is also being eaten away by this disease. I believe it was like MS. And so it kind of creates this interesting scenario where somebody who doesn't know or doesn't feel this disease is potentially infecting all these other people, and somebody who is trying to stop that is physically being just deteriorated by this disease. So it was interesting. It didn't quite go far enough. It didn't have enough bite to it for me to really latch into it, but it was well made for sure. Number 90 is The Apprentice. This is the Donald Trump movie, and I had no interest in watching this, but it was a secret screening, so I kind of got in a situation where I had to watch it at Fantastic Fest. Sebastian Stan does a fantastic job performing here. I think that he does a very good job at capturing Donald Trump throughout the eras, as well as the direction and the cinematography and the way that they have the film grain and everything. They really captured the look of the different eras of the movie. So technically, it's a really well-made movie. I do think that there is some appeal for what they're going for here. The problem is, I just have no interest in watching a Donald Trump movie. And I don't think really anybody does, because people who hate him don't want to watch a movie about him. People that love him don't want to watch a movie where Hollywood is very clearly trying to give him like a villain origin story like Scarface. And everybody in the middle doesn't really want to watch Hollywood trying to put a movie out and influence our vote right before an election. And I guess I can say this now. That didn't work out so well, did it? 89, The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. I am a fan of this later era of Guy Ritchie films. This one seemed like an easy win. It's like a zany version of Inglourious Bastards. And the portion of the movie that was focused on that, I was certainly entertained by. The majority of the movie, though, is not focused on that. It's focused on these other two characters, on this espionage plot that I really was never entertained or interested in. And even the wild, zany characters mowing down Nazis really kind of ran out of appeal after the first 2 or 3 times that they just decimate everybody with absolute ease. So this one was a pretty big disappointment for me. 88, House of Spoils. I think this is on Amazon Prime, and it's essentially like The Bear with witches. You have a woman who is a chef in a high-stress restaurant, leaves that industry to go and start her own restaurant, and they buy a building that is unknown to them on this cursed land, and everything that they try to cook that doesn't use the produce that grows on this cursed land turns to shit. And so it's a movie that the foodie side of me was disappointed in it because I didn't feel like there was enough charm or enough focus put on the side of that interests me, and just kind of felt like a pale imitation of The Bear. And then the horror side of me wasn't satisfied because that's like 25% of the movie. Like, you're a good hour into the movie before anything starts to feel even somewhat horror. So it's fine. It's a decent enough watch, but this could have been a huge win for me, and I just felt underwhelmed by it. 87, Mufasa the Lion King. I wasn't a fan of the Lion King, I would say live action, but it's not the CGI remake. And this only interested me because they're telling a brand new story in this world. And as much as I don't really care for prequels, I was like, okay, fine. Let's find out why Mufasa and Scar ended up mortal enemies, or what pissed off Scar and, Mufasa didn't realize he was his mortal enemy. And unfortunately, the part of the movie where we start to get that answer feels like they absolutely just fast forward and microwave that side of the storyline. It all happens like within a scene. Scar completely changes personality in seconds over something that doesn't feel like it should be that consequential for their relationship. And Mufasa turns into this huge, like, almost Christ-like figure in the jungle in seconds, where he hasn't really earned that yet. And then the movie just ends. So it's fine. Like, the CGI is amazing. It's immaculate. I didn't think that the songs were all that memorable. It's perfectly watchable. But the side of the story that and I think everybody else was most interested in was the side of the story that the filmmakers were seemingly the least interested in. So what the fuck? 86, Things Will Be Different. I saw this at Overlook Film Festival, and I think it just got released maybe a month or so ago. So it would be on VOD for you to check out. It's a time travel movie that I think earns a couple more watches and maybe I will like it more if I revisit it. It is a slower film, so I'm not exactly in a hurry to rewatch it. But what I loved about it is that I really like time travel movies, and I like movies that can play off of that and do something different with it, which this does. It's focused on these two people, this brother and sister, who commit a crime, and there is this like underground society or underground company that provides this service where you go to this little isolated house and there is time travel technology in the house. And so you can use the house to go to a different time until essentially the heat cools down, and then you go back to your time and get away with your crime, walk away with the money, whatever you're doing. But they get stuck at this house after they time travel because somebody is coming to the house, like somebody is descending on it and they get wind of it, and so they essentially lock all the technology. So the movie is mostly about these two characters locked in this house waiting for something to happen, waiting for somebody to arrive. They don't know who, they don't know what their intentions are, they don't know what's going on, but it's a bottle movie. So it builds intrigue. The issue is it's a movie where you have all these puzzle pieces that I'm totally fine putting together myself, but the filmmaker intentionally leaves like a third of the puzzle pieces out of the box. So they even said in a Q&A, like, I leave so much out of this movie because I don't want to give any answers. I want you to kind of come up with your own thing, which can be cool sometimes, but when it's to this degree, it's just frustrating because a movie like this, I want to be able to rewatch it and start to put together the little missing pieces and figure out things and catch things I didn't see before. And it just feels like a movie that no matter how much work I put into it, is never completely going to make sense. And that just doesn't work for me. 85, humanist vampire seeking consensual suicidal person. See what I said earlier about quirky humor? This is very much on that wavelength, and so I think that was my biggest thing that I bumped up against. But story-wise, it's certainly an interesting take on vampires. It's got a heart to it. It's got a charm to it. There's people that I was with at the Overlook Film Festival that loved this movie, one of which I think is her favorite vampire film of all time. So take that with a grain of salt. We all have different tastes, so I appreciated this one more than I enjoyed it. 84 is Red One. Not a great movie, but a bit overhated in my opinion. I think a lot of the drama regarding Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, all of the tabloid stuff about the hyper-inflated budget and all of that kind of colored everybody's ultra negative response to this movie. Where if you take the movie on its own merits, I think it's fine. I think it's much better than the other Hollywood movies that we got that went straight to streaming. So Santa gets kidnapped. You have Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and Chris Evans team up to go and find him. It's not awesome. It's not a Christmas classic by any means, but if somebody throws this on in the month of December, I'll be fine to rewatch it. Number 83, we got The Bike Riders, and this is a movie that kind of feels like the prequel to the movie that I actually want to watch. This is based off of a true story of very early on before motorcycle gangs turned into like the crime syndicates that they eventually did. You got Tom Hardy. I don't know where Paul came from. Tom Hardy as the leader of this gang. You've got Austin Butler as the rebel without a cause, and you got Jodie Comer as the girl who eventually becomes Austin Butler's wife. And so it's just telling you the tale of how this motorcycle gang got started and like a decade or so of that story. And there's moments that the movie had my interest. There's certainly some characters and some actors that show up that pique my interest. You got Norman Reedus in here with absolute meth mouth, and chicks probably still want to fuck him. But it's a movie that just feels like it's building towards something and it just never quite gets there. Like it's all kind of told in all of the end cards, all the stuff that we're waiting for. Like we're waiting for the gang violence. We're waiting for things to explode. We're waiting for a rivalry and, some shootings or something to happen that you expect when you think a motorcycle gang movie. And it's just not that. It's like a motorcycle gang hangout movie. They just hang out, talk about how cool it is to be in a motorcycle gang. Number 82, we got Y2K, and this one, it was just okay. It's a movie that has kind of that stoner humor to it. I think the first act was somewhat funny, but as the movie goes on, they keep killing off the most funny character that's remaining in this group. And so I liked some of the nostalgia of going back to 1999. I certainly remember a lot of the things that they were doing that they're playing off of here and making jokes about, but the movie just kind of got less interesting and less funny and entertaining as it went on. 81, Godzilla x Kong, The New Empire. And believe it or not, having it at 81 is kind of a compliment coming from me because I don't like any of these Godzilla, King Kong, kaiju movies. They are just absolutely not my thing. Godzilla -1 last year is the first Godzilla film that I liked anywhere near that level. And this one, for being an intentionally stupid Hollywood version of this, it was fine. Like, it was somewhat entertaining. Dan Stevens was fun. There was some fun to be had with the fight scenes. I think there was like a suplex at one point. So you know what you're getting into. This is a dumb as fuck, shut your brain off and shovel popcorn into your mouth type of movie. And I didn't hate it. Number 80, Kung Fu Panda 4. I honestly remember almost nothing about this film, so that kind of justifies where it's at here. I really enjoy the first 3 films. This one was the first one that kind of felt like, okay, I think we've seen enough Kung Fu Panda. 79, In a Violent Nature. Certainly an interesting idea that if executed a little bit differently could have been a huge shot in the arm for the slasher genre, would have created a whole new trend, and we would have saw a ton of these POV killer type movies, and who knows, maybe we still will. But for me, this had a great kill, like an all-timer kill. Certainly had moments where it had me, but the majority of the runtime was just Jason walking through the woods. And how entertaining is it to watch a silent killer walk through the woods? Not very. Number 78 is a complicated one. It's Horizon, a American Saga, Chapter 1. And this is the first of, I believe, 4 films that are to be directed by Kevin Costner. I think only the first 2 have been shot. The second one was supposed to come out at the end of last year, and they ended up canceling it because Horizon Chapter 1 did so terribly at the box office, which, no disrespect to Kevin Costner, but duh, like, who the fuck expected this to be a huge success? And I think he'd be the first person to tell you, I made this knowing it was going to bomb. I made this for me. This is something that's going to have its legs later. I don't give a shit about box office. So that said, I don't know. I can't really fairly grade this movie until I see the rest of it, because this is not something that really survives well as a standalone chapter. This is literally like the first act of a story, even though it's 3 fucking hours long. So this is essentially like an epic, in every sense of the word, Western that feels more appropriate to be like a huge budget miniseries or something on a streaming service. But because Kevin Costner is somebody that's just so dedicated to his craft and is dedicated to old school filmmaking and the theater experience, he made it this way and wanted it to be in theaters for people to check out. And modern movie audiences just aren't into Western. Certainly not a 3-hour Western that's only a quarter of a story. So it's very well made. It's very well directed. It's very well acted. You got a ton of actors that I love in here. But after 3 hours, I still had no real idea what was happening in the story, because you're spending all this time on like 5 or 6 different groups of characters that don't even start to intersect by the end of the first act. So until I see Chapter 2, Chapter 3, Chapter 4, I really don't know how I feel about Horizon. But if I have to grade it as an individual experience, I wasn't in a huge hurry to watch Chapter 2. 77, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. I was a big fan of Afterlife, and I was majorly disappointed in this one. Still fun to be had. There's still some charm of anything related to Ghostbusters, but feels like they had enough storylines, plot lines, and characters to fill out at least 2 Ghostbusters films, and so this was incredibly overstuffed, and anything I was interested in gets shortchanged for something I wasn't so interested in. 76 is Werewolves, The Purge with werewolves. It was fun. It was entertaining. Certainly wish that it could have went a bit further with its concept, but I like the overall supermoon setup to this. I think there's potential to do more here, so hopefully it was successful enough to give us a prequel or a sequel, and I would assume that they'd probably do a lot more with it if they get a second chance. 75, VHS Beyond. I'm not a big fan of found footage or horror anthologies. This is both. And for all the VHS films that I have seen, this one is actually the one that I have enjoyed the most. I liked every single segment except for the last one. So coming from me, that's a pretty big praise. So if you're a VHS fan, I definitely recommend checking this one out because it was certainly one of the stronger ones. 74 is Woman of the Hour, and this is a Netflix film. I think it was Anna Kendrick's directorial debut. About this true story where a guy who was murdering women goes onto the dating show in the 70s. And so this is telling the story of the woman that actually went on the date with him after he won the show. And I thought that the beginning of the film started off really intriguing, and then as we got into the dating game stuff, I appreciated how they were able to like recreate that era and recreate the 70s TV show style, similar to how like Late Night with the Devil did a little bit better in my opinion, which is why it's higher. But I just started to lose a lot of the tension and started to lose a lot of that interest as the movie went on. I didn't feel like they really kept the darkness in the forefront during the middle act when it was all about the zany goofiness of the dating game. So it was fine, certainly an interesting story, but didn't completely come together by the end of it to be something that was overly memorable for me. 73 Apartment 7A. This is the prequel to Rosemary's Baby, and it was much better than I thought it was going to be. You know, this is something that's perfectly watchable. I don't think that it does anything that insults or takes away from Rosemary's Baby. It's just an issue of it being pretty much the exact same movie. You have a woman who is seemingly pregnant with the Antichrist and is getting indoctrinated in with the people in this building. And if you've seen Rosemary's Baby, you already know the fate of this character. So it's well made. It's fine. It's watchable, but was it necessary? Is it something that I could see myself watching this instead of Rosemary's Baby ever? No. 72 is Stream. This is a new franchise brought to you by a lot of the people who work with the Terrifier franchise. Michael Levy is the director, the writer, the producer, and I think the editor of this one. This is his brainchild, his baby, and he's one of the main producers of Terrifier 2 and 3. And this is a fun movie if you like what the Terrifier crew does. It's along that same type of appeal. It's definitely a more gore-filled, type of low budget slasher that's got a high concept here about this game. You got some really fun characters in here played by horror alumni like Jeffrey Combs, and then you've got Daniel Harrison here who does a great job, a number of others that are big cameos and even some small cameos. Issue with the movie is that it's like 30 minutes at least too long. I think they overstuffed the cameos in this, and so as much as I enjoy what they were going for, it really overstays its welcome. But I dig the concept. I dig the style here. Of course, I'm a fan of these guys just as people and as creatives, so I hope they get to do more. 71 is Arcadian. This is kind of like a riff on A Quiet Place with Nicolas Cage, only instead of it being sound that is like the gimmick that draws in the monsters, it's the darkness. So they only come out at night. And it's one of those movies where you have two boys. One, absolute good soldier, listens to his father, does everything he's supposed to. The other one is absolute rebel and wants to do everything his dad tells him not to do. So it's cool if you like A Quiet Place, if you want to see something that's in the vein of that. The creature design was the most memorable thing about this. It just didn't rise anywhere near to the levels of any of the Quiet Place movies for me. So cool. Not amazing. 70, we have Sting, and this one was actually a lot of fun. You have a alien spider that is let loose in this apartment building. It's about this big at first, and everything that it eats, it gets bigger and eventually turns into like the size of a Volvo. So it's very much a campy B-movie approach. It's hard R, it's gore-filled. There was a bit too much of zany characters here. It felt like the entire fucking apartment building was all like these weirdos. So would have appreciated a bit more balance in the cast, but as a spider movie, I thought that it was very effective, and I appreciate how hard R it was. So this one was fun. 69 is going to be Monster Summer, one of the more criminally overlooked films this year. If you want something to watch with your family, with younger kids that you kind of want to see how they do with the horror genre, but don't want something overly intense, this is one that I definitely recommend that you check out. It's very much in the vein of Stranger Things or Summer of '84. A witch is taking over this town, and all the kids start to figure it out, and they kind of band together to stop the witch. They enlist the help of Mel Gibson, who's kind of like the grizzled old neighbor who is a retired cop and comes in and helps them investigate. If you're a 90s kid and you grew up watching things like Goosebumps and Are You Afraid of the Dark, you'll get a lot of joy out of this one. Number 68 is Challengers, and I'm sure there's going to be a number of people that think this is incredibly low on this list. This is a movie that I think is very well made. I think that it's directed extremely well. The editing especially is wild in this one. A lot of crazy things done with the camera here. Really good performances. A really good score by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. Maybe a little bit overbearing at times, but certainly memorable. The issue with this film is that I just found the characters to be so unlikable that I could never really get into the movie. Like, it's kind of advertised and was billed as like the sexy threesome tennis movie. It's not that at all. It's about just very toxic relationship between these three people, with Zendaya as an absolute menace at the forefront of all of this. And I just didn't care too much about what happened because all three of them were just despicable people. So I get the appeal here. It's just not a movie that I could see myself rewatching. I enjoyed it on a certain level. I certainly respect the hell out of it, but I enjoyed all these other movies more. 67, we got Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice, not a big Tim Burton guy, but I do enjoy the first Beetlejuice. I was really looking forward to this one. Still had fun with it, but much like with Ghostbusters, Frozen Empire, it felt like they had at least 2 movies worth of ideas in here, and so everything that I thought was really interesting and was really captivating would get shortchanged and dispensed of to start focusing on something else. And so everything cool about this movie feels like it's a half measure. 66 is Society of the Snow. I'll be honest, this is just kind of falling victim to being a movie that I saw a year ago now and don't remember a whole lot about. I think it was well made. It's telling the story of a real life event of these people that got trapped on this mountain, had to resort to cannibalism. So it's certainly an effective movie, but not one that's necessarily beyond a one watch for me. It's, again, one of those movies that, like, I respect it, but on an enjoyment level, it's a one and done, and certainly did not stick with me for the year that was 2024. 65, Gladiator 2. I absolutely adore the first film. Never understood why they wanted to make a sequel, and when I watched it, all those fears were pretty much confirmed. It's still entertaining, but it's a shut your brain off type film, and I don't want a shut your brain off type film to be a sequel to one of the greatest movies ever made, in my opinion, of Gladiator. So I enjoyed aspects of this, the gladiator battles, and a lot of the epic sense to what they're doing here to kind of expand on what was done in the Colosseums was really interesting. Denzel Washington, of course, is a lot of fun to watch. Seems like he's in a different movie than everybody else, but I didn't even really mind that so much. But it's a dumb sword and sandals action type film, and so I can't love it. It's no. We don't need a sequel to Gladiator. We never did. 64 is Monkey Man, and this is one that I think is certainly interesting. You got Dev Patel in his directorial debut. They advertised this thing trying to capitalize on making it look like a John Wick clone. It's really not that at all. It's very much focused on Indian culture and everything like that. And so while that was interesting, I also felt like I was at arm's distance with it because I don't have a lot of knowledge of Indian culture. And the action sequences were really well done, so that's certainly what brings it up a bit more on this list. I'm very curious to see what he does next as a director, so you did your job for a directorial debut. You have my interest. 63 is The Order. This is a film that felt like, on paper, it was something that would have been a lot more intense, a lot more interesting, but a lot of times when you follow true stories and you follow real life, sometimes the true stories aren't nearly as interesting or entertaining as fake stories, as fictional stories. So you have a movie that's kind of in the vein of The Town, but with neo-Nazis instead of Boston bank robbers. And there's really good performances here, namely Jude Law as the FBI guy who's hunting these people down. I just never really felt like the movie really kicked into gear. You know, I appreciated how violent it was. I appreciated the fact that they definitely were going for a very intense tone, but it's a lot of watching Nicholas Hoult and his neo-Nazi buddies, and he's, preaching and, appealing to a group and certainly having that cult leader aspect. And then you have Jude Law and the rookie of Ty Sheridan knocking on doors and trying to figure out things. So I liked it. It's well done, but I don't know. Something about it feels like it's a movie that I've seen the better version of somewhere else. Number 62 is Saturday Night. And this is a film that I saw at almost midnight on like day 3 of Fantastic Fest. It was the first secret screening. And so I do want to watch this again when I'm less tired. This was a movie that I certainly would have played better for me earlier in the day. I'm a fan of the 90s era of Saturday Night Live. I don't really have a whole lot of fandom or even knowledge of the early seasons. And this is a story telling you about all the chaos and drama and antics that happened 90 minutes before the first episode of Saturday Night Live aired. And so it's a really interesting idea. And I think that they do a great job at casting people and their performance of recreating some of these famous actors like Chevy Chase and Billy Crystal. And there's some moments of really good humor in here, but it's just a very chaotic movie and a movie that never really stops to take a breath, which is certainly the intended experience here. Just wasn't the experience that I needed to have when I first watched it. So I would assume when I rewatch this, it would probably go up at least a few spots. I liked it, just it didn't hit the way that I wanted it to. And a lot of that probably just has to do with me not having any inherent love or knowledge or nostalgia for this era of Saturday Night Live cast. Number 61 is Getaway, and this is a film where you have Nick Frost and his family that go off on vacation to this little isolated island, and all of the people who are native to this island do not want them there. So it's kind of a horror comedy take on something like Midsummer or The Wicker Man, where it's like this pagan cult and, you know, folk horror, something like that. And it's a movie that if you enjoy that subgenre, it's fun for the first hour or so, and then kind of on a dime, this thing just takes off and gets fucking wild. And it ended up being a movie that if you like those types of films, if you like that subgenre and you want to kind of see a crazy spin on it, definitely check this one out. Number 60, we have Smile 2, a film that I liked but didn't like near as much as a lot of other people. I enjoy the first Smile, and so I had modest expectations for this one. And I think that Naomi Scott does an incredible job. I think that Parker Finn as a director does an incredible job. I thought that the opening sequence was awesome, probably my favorite part of the movie. I just didn't feel like this did enough new. It didn't do enough new with the concept aside from just putting it in the world of a pop star. We didn't learn anything new about this Smile demon. Like, we go through all the same investigative storyline trying to figure out the curse and tie things together. By the end of it, don't learn a single new thing about where this thing came from, how to stop it, how it works, nothing. And it pulls the rug out from under you like 2 or 3 different times in the movie where it's like, just kidding, the last number of scenes don't count. And that just gets really frustrating for me if they do it too much. And I think they did it way too much in this movie. So I liked it. Certainly didn't love it. 59 is Daddy's Head, and this is a movie that I describe as the Babadook for step parents. And if you hated the Babadook because of the kid, there's nothing like that in here, so don't take that as a sign that you won't enjoy this. You have a father that dies at the beginning and leaves his new wife as a widow and leaves his son as an orphan. And as they're grieving and trying to figure out how they're going to continue their lives, and this very newly appointed stepmother is trying to figure out whether she actually wants to take the responsibility of this kid that she kind of just now started to become a parent for, all the while they're being tormented by this thing that takes the face of the father, hence the title of the film. A number of really creepy moments in here, some really creepy visuals. I like what the overall story was going for with, you know, the parent trying to step up. It's something that means a lot to me personally. So I did enjoy this one. And as I said, if you like the Babadook, definitely check it out. And if you didn't like the Babadook, give this one a shot. You might like it more. Number 58, we got Young Lion of the West. This is my buddy Joey Sasso's film that he and his writing partner Josh made for $13,000. It's a film that is absolutely a quintessential boots to the ground independent film, where you want to see something that people made that just are film fans and will scrounge together money and call in favors and go through hell and high water to make a film and get a story out there. This is it. It's very in the vein of things like Mean Streets. And so it's a movie that, just because I'm his friend, of course I want to celebrate, but I got to be honest, and I told Joey this, like, because I know Joey and I know his personality, and of course everybody knows him from reality TV, I was like, I don't know, man, like, how good is the Joey Sasso movie going to be? We'll see, and you'll be shocked. You'll be shocked at how good he is and how good the movie is. It's not going to be for everybody. It's definitely a movie for a very specific audience. It's kind of a party movie that turns into like this crime thriller, but if you want to see a absolute independent movie, this is something to check out. And yeah, it's this high on the list because I genuinely think it's really well done. Number 57, we have Juror Number 2, a movie that is potentially Clint Eastwood's final film and was strangely buried by WB. But it's a movie that I wish I loved, but I just liked it. You know, it's a very intriguing premise. It's a very intriguing setup, where you have Nicholas Hoult, who gets chosen to be a juror for this murder trial. And again, this is the setup of the film, so this is not a spoiler. Very early on, as soon as he is at the court and he's hearing the court case that he is about to be a juror for, he realizes that the crime that this person is on trial for is possibly something that he is at fault for. And so it's a movie about him trying to put the pieces together and figure out if he's remembering things correctly, if he's actually at fault for this crime, while also trying to kind of keep everybody at bay at the jury so that they don't convict a wrongfully convicted man, while at the same time trying to kind of cover his ass a little bit. So it's a movie with a great premise and a really good cast that's very quiet about what could have been a much more intense movie. It's a movie that's very mild-mannered with the way that it goes about this storyline. And I just wish it was a little more intense. There was so much at play here for this thing to continue to just ramp up the tension and be a bit of a cat and mouse game and to put you on the edge of your seat wondering if he's going to figure out something really bad or if he's going to be able to get away with certain things, if he's going to be able to keep the jury at bay. And it's just not that type of film. So I could see some people preferring that direction. For me, I just kept thinking, man, I wish I could see the more intense version of this. I probably would love it. Number 56 is Blink Twice. This was the directorial debut of Zoe Kravitz. And it's a movie that, man, it was so frustrating that there was so much here that I loved. And then it was kind of cut off at the knees by a lot of things that just really puzzled me and things that just did not come together for me. You have all these people on this island, a bunch of rich guys and a bunch of women that are there just to have fun. And things start to feel very odd, very dreamlike, very disorienting, both from a direction standpoint as well as a narrative standpoint. So it's a very well directed movie. It's certainly just like Better Man, or not Better Man, Monkey Man. Better Man we haven't talked about yet. Just like with Monkey Man is a movie that makes me interested in the future of Zoe Kravitz. But the more that the movie starts to unveil things and starts to give you answers to things, like there's some of it that's intriguing, there's some of it that's a nice payoff, and there's other things that just causes a whole bunch of questions and just leaves you maddeningly puzzled. And the note that the movie decided to end on was kind of a turnoff for me too. I don't really understand what was trying to be conveyed there. It just didn't completely come together. So a movie that shows a lot of promise for Zoe Kravitz, could have very easily, with a few tweaks, been a movie I enjoyed a lot more, but just ended up being kind of a frustrating experience. 55, Beverly Hills Cop Axel F. I am a huge fan of the Beverly Hills Cop franchise. I even really enjoy the third film. Call it nostalgia, call it, rose-colored glasses for things that you enjoyed as a kid, whatever. I enjoy all three of them. I've been waiting to see if maybe one day Eddie Murphy would come back to his most popular role, and it seemed like it was just an ill-fated project. And then finally we got this one. And I was shocked that it wasn't terrible because it was a straight-to-Netflix film. I actually thought it was very entertaining. Not perfect. I think that his daughter holds it back a lot, just being a wet blanket character. But it captures a lot of the charm of some of the early films. It captures the chemistry between Eddie Murphy and Taggart and Billy Rosewood for the bit that they're together on here. I really thought that Joseph Gordon-Levitt was great in here. I wish he would have been in the movie more instead of the daughter. So as a Beverly Hills Cop fan and as an Eddie Murphy fan, I thought that this one was good, and I hope that this is a sign of better things to come from Eddie Murphy in the future. 54 is Civil War, another film like Challengers that some people are going to be like, wow, why is that so low? Civil War is a movie that I definitely appreciated. I think that it was an interesting little snapshot into a potential future. I appreciated the fact that it wasn't a movie that took a political stance. It just kind of said like, hey, here's maybe a direction that we're heading with such a divisive political climate in our country. Where do you see yourself in this? And, what do you think? And it doesn't really make a hard commit, in my opinion. Some people argued hard the other way on who's right, who's wrong, who caused this, who's at fault. It's just like, hey, alternate future, check it out. And it's certainly gripping. And it's certainly something that is an intense mirror to hold up to everybody. There's some pretty intense sequences in here. Certainly the most notable one is the one with Jesse Plemons. I did find myself a little frustrated at some of the ambiguity. There were some questions that I had that I wish would have been answered in the movie. And even bigger issue was I just found myself very frustrated with the lead character here, Kaylee Spaney's character. I think that she's a great actress and I loved her in Alien Romulus, but she is playing a character that is one of my least favorite tropes, which is the rookie that doesn't listen to anybody and gets a lot of people killed. So throughout the film, you're just with a group of people where it's just like, can you make worse decisions? Because the more stupid decisions you make, the harder it is for me to really engage with you as characters and feel bad for anything bad that happens to you. 53 is As Real. This is a film that I missed at the Overlook Film Festival and checked out later on when it was coming to theaters. And this is certainly an interesting concept. It's a post-apocalyptic film with a biblical edge where the rapture has happened and everybody left on Earth is everybody that did not go to heaven. And so you have a lot of people left who have severed their vocal cords to like renounce their sin of speech. There are people that were left on the world that have turned into these monsters called the Burned. And it's essentially a film with no dialogue because nobody's able to talk, where you're following Samara Weaving as she's trying to escape this very fucked up community and trying to get from point A to point B. And you're just kind of getting introduced to this world, introduced to this lore. And it's so intriguing and so fast-paced and intense, and Samara Weaving is great, but it leaves you wanting so many more answers and so much more context for this world and for this lore and for how, the biblical stuff ties into what we are seeing on screen. And you just can't get any of it because pretty much none of the characters talk. So it was the gimmick of the movie, but it was also the biggest Achilles heel of the movie for me. I wish I could have gotten at least a couple of characters in here. Like she comes across a few people that don't have the severed vocal cords that can give some exposition to what's going on. So I liked it, but by the end I was like, fuck, I wanted so much more of that. I wanted more from this. 52, a big surprise, Better Man. I'm not a musical guy, and I sat down to a secret screening at Fantastic Fest, and they said, congratulations, you're going to watch a movie about the UK pop star Robbie Williams where he's played by a monkey. And I went, what the fuck are you talking about? Who the hell is Robbie Williams, and why the fuck is this playing at Fantastic Fest? And I'll be damned, I enjoyed this movie. I don't think that Robbie Williams' story is all that interesting, and so you have the monkey put in here, and there's no context or explanation given to why he's a monkey and everybody else is human, and for some reason that brings this odd charm to it and makes the harsher side of his story and his character a lot more tolerable and a lot more sympathetic, I guess. I don't know why. And I thought the music was pretty good. I'm not really a big pop guy, but it was at least fun to see how they brought that into the movie. I thought that there was some really interesting direction going on. So it's a movie that when they announced it, I was like, fuck, I'm going to hate this. Why am I here? Is there anything else that's playing? Please get me out of here. And by the end, I ended up really enjoying it. So check it out. It's playing and actually doing pretty well right now in theaters. 51 is Ick, a film that I hope comes out in 2025. I haven't seen any news about this getting any kind of distribution, but it is a horror comedy where you have like this alien root system that is all over town that they call the Ick, and it's essentially a movie that's like satirizing society. You have like woke characters that are kind of getting roasted here. You have everybody's different varying responses to COVID that's getting roasted here. It's a movie that's taking a very direct jab at pretty much everybody. And a lot of that humor does land pretty well. So it's a fun movie, and it's got a really good soundtrack if you are my age and you remember a lot of the songs that were hit radio songs on pop punk rock radio in the early 2000s. So this is a fun one. This is one that I certainly enjoyed. It was one of my favorite ones from this festival, and I hope that it comes out sooner than later because I think people are really going to dig it. Coming in at 50 is Infested, and this is probably the most effective spider horror film that I've ever seen. You have this quickly reproducing spider that is let loose in this apartment building, and it just absolutely takes hold of the entire building. You have large spiders, tiny spiders, multiple spiders, and it's just really intense. If you are arachnophobic at all, this thing is just going to absolutely cripple you. Like, it really puts you on edge. There's a number of sequences that made me squirm. The only issue with the film that held it back from being significantly higher, because I genuinely think it's a very well done spider movie, and I'm looking forward to seeing what this director is going to do with an Evil Dead film that he's making, because his style certainly lends itself to Evil Dead. The issue that dropped it quite a few spots is that I just really didn't like the way that it wrapped up. It tries to ramp up the action side of things in the third act, and the way that they narratively had to make that happen just really felt out of nowhere. It felt like we didn't need to do this. And so the last like 5 to 10 minutes of the film, it was just like, why? Why'd we go this direction? You were doing great, and now just this feels weird. Number 49 is going to be Lisa Frankenstein. This is from the daughter of Robin Williams, and this is kind of like the modern take on Edward Scissorhands or Heathers. So it's not necessarily a movie that's made for me, but I still had a pretty good time with it. I like the two main stars. I thought that Sprouse was really fun with his physical performance as this zombie, this undead guy. So if my daughters got into this, and I assume that they would if they ever watch it, I wouldn't mind watching it again. Number 48 is Immaculate, one of 3 We're Having a Satan Baby movies that we got in 2024. And this one surprised me. I didn't really know much about it. I didn't have much expectation for it. I had never seen Sydney Sweeney act before. Of course, I was familiar with her, but I don't watch Euphoria and hadn't seen anything from her. So I wasn't sure what this was going to be, and I thought it was actually a pretty effective, pretty creepy little nun horror film. The third act kind of goes balls to the wall. The ending certainly does, and the ending, the last 5 to 10 minutes, is really like a showcase for what Sydney Sweeney can do as an actress. So she certainly has my attention. I'm looking forward to seeing what she does next. 47 is The Beekeeper. This is directed by David Ayer and starring Jason Statham, and they just dropped a trailer actually today as I am recording this for another collaboration between these two, which is a very similar premise. Jason Statham is going to kick the shit out of a bunch of bad guys. And you know what? I'm all for it. For the people that are still keeping alive like these mid-budget 80s, 90s action thrillers, I think Jason Statham is one of the more successful at it. And The Beekeeper was fun. Like, it's not a great movie, but if you like B-action movies, no pun intended, this one has some pretty good action. You see a lot of very bad people have some very bad things done to them. And even some of the one-liners and the B-puns, I got a good kick out of them. So I'm here for however many of these little collaborations these two want to make, as long as they're on this level of entertaining. Number 46 is Night Call. This is a film that I think is a French film. I'm not sure if it's been released yet. I saw this again at Fantastic Fest, and all the way up until like the last 10 minutes, I really enjoyed this movie. You basically have a locksmith that is called to this apartment to help this woman get into the door that she's locked out of. And inadvertently, he doesn't realize he is letting somebody in who is going to steal a bunch of money from a drug dealer and then take off. And so the crime syndicate that wants this money back takes him and tasks him with finding this woman and getting this money back. Otherwise, they're going to kill him. It's a really nice little thriller. I think that it plays a little differently than more movies like this because of the locksmith angle. There's even like a really silly segment where he's like suiting up for the third act and he's getting all his locksmith gear on, almost like Batman suiting up in his armor. The only issue with the film, which dropped it down quite a bit, is that it's set in the backdrop of the Black Lives Matter riots in France. And at the very end of the film, it goes from just being the backdrop of the movie to being like the main point of the movie out of nowhere. And so it just feels like another movie that tries to push this social message and tries to put this like commentary out there when it doesn't feel like it fits into the movie. It was never integrated into the rest of the film. And so out of nowhere, it just kind of feels like, here's the point, see you later. And it's just jarring. It kind of leaves a bad taste in your mouth. If you wanted to talk about that, that's fine. This is an interesting movie to do that in, but you got to do it before the climax of the movie. You can't just surprise us with suddenly that's the point of your film. 45 is Fall Guy. Entertaining movie. It wasn't as amazing for me as it was for some others, but I definitely got what I wanted out of it. There's some really fun action here, some good homage played to the industry of stunt workers who have historically kind of gone underappreciated. The romance side of things, the romantic comedy side of things, is where I felt like this movie didn't quite measure up, tried to do a little bit too much, but I liked the stars, had a good time with it. It wasn't successful enough to merit a sequel, but if it was, I wouldn't mind watching another one. 44, you got Boy Kills World, a movie that I wasn't really sure was going to be my thing because I don't tend to get into overly silly movies like this, but this is essentially like a cartoon brought to life with Bill Skarsgård in the role. He's somebody who doesn't talk, and he just kicks the shit out of a bunch of people in some pretty entertaining, fight sequences, and I'm pretty sure the voiceover that's like his inner thoughts is the guy who does the voice for Bob's Burgers, which brings a really interesting like cartoonish dynamic to the movie too. So it's zany, it's batshit, it's weird. Certain people, this is going to be like one of their favorite films of the year. For somebody who this isn't typically my forte, I had a pretty good time with it. Number 43 is Furiosa, a movie that certainly was disappointing for me, but not enough for it to make my most disappointing of the year because I never had my expectations too high for this. I loved Fury Road. I really loved the character of Furiosa. If they had capitalized and released this movie within 4 years of Mad Max Fury Road coming out, I think that everybody would have been a lot more ready for it, but they just took way too long to put this thing out. All of the steam had kind of left from the Fury Road hype, and the fact that you have a movie here that even has the subtitle of a Mad Max saga, but Mad Max is not in the movie at all, except for like maybe like a POV shot. But when people go to see a Mad Max film, a franchise that has been celebrated and loved and a mainstay for decades, they want to see Mad Max. Not to say that Furiosa is not a character that can hold her own in a movie, because she was arguably the main character of Fury Road, but people want to see Mad Max in a Mad Max movie. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is that it's just the prequel problem. You kind of see the writing on the wall of the story you're going to be told here. I don't think I really needed to see the origin of Furiosa. There really weren't any kind of revelations that made her a more interesting character. And the biggest issue that I had is that one of the things that we loved so much about Fury Road and most of the Mad Max movies is that grit of the practical effects, the practical cars, iron on iron stunt work, and this film felt very CGI'd. It felt very glossy, almost comic booky, and that's, again, not something that we go to a Mad Max movie for, and you could see that from the first trailer, and I think that's one of the main reasons why a lot of people didn't show up for this one. So just like with Fall Guy, this was kind of like, for a lot of people, a surprise flop when it wasn't all that surprising to me. It's solid. If you enjoyed Fury Road, it's worth checking out, but I'm not at all surprised that people weren't going in this in droves. 42 is Oddity, definitely a creepy movie, one that I would like to watch again at some point. It maybe been a little bit too overhyped for me. A lot of people were saying this was the scariest movie of the year, which is something I felt like so many horror films this year got that brand. But it's a creepy environment. It's a creepy atmosphere that this movie lives in. So I enjoyed it for the most part. By the end of it, it just didn't quite have the punch that I was expecting for a movie with this level of hype. 41, we got Sonic the Hedgehog 3. I really enjoy this franchise. I think that to an extent they continue to get better. I think that the approach that they take in this one is certainly the way to go, where they let all the human characters fall to the background with the exception of Robotnik and keep all the focus on the Sonic team, the villain, and Robotnik, whatever's going on with them. So that approach here compared to the first two movies, I think, is significantly better. I did have a bit more fun with the second film, though, just because that film represents my era of Sonic gaming. I was a big fan of Sonic the Hedgehog 2 and Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Shadow and any characters we're going to get from here on out, that was kind of like the era after I had stopped playing Sonic games. So I dug this one. I had fun with it. My daughter loved it. I enjoy this franchise and can't wait to see what they do with the fourth one. Number 40, we got Rebel Ridge. And I think this movie was a bit of a victim to my expectations. I still enjoyed it. It is fairly high on this list. It was one of the better, and certainly actually one of the best of the streaming movies that I saw in 2024 or over the last couple of years. This is a movie that is definitely my type of thing, one of those old school action thrillers, but a lot of people that were really getting me hyped for this one was describing it as like this badass old school action movie. And I don't know, this movie, like, there's action here, but I would say it's more of a thriller and less of an action film. Like, the action sequences here are not the cream of the crop, in my opinion. They're not the point of the movie. And even the fighting style of the character is not so much to kick the shit out of everybody, it's to disarm them. So it's very different. But I like the story here, a little bit of a revenge plot, a little bit of playing into first blood with the corrupt cops in these small towns. So I enjoyed it, and I do like the fact that it got a lot of attention to the main actor, who has since been cast as Green Lantern. So it's worth checking out. It's solid. 39 is going to be Wicked. Now, again, another movie that people are probably going to say is surprisingly low because it's a very big popular pick this year. But if you know how much I don't like musicals, 39 is a pretty huge compliment for this movie. I had no interest in this. I'm not a musical guy. I'm not a Wizard of Oz guy. I have no knowledge of the Broadway play. So this was something that was just like, okay, my girls, my wife is going to want to go see this, so I'm sure I'll see it at some point. And they really enjoyed it. My youngest daughter has been singing Popular for fucking constantly since we've seen this. But that's a testament to what a cultural impact this is going to have and how well these songs are written and performed and why the Broadway play has had such a long stay and now turning into this big blockbuster movie. So I enjoyed it for the most part. I did feel like I'm not going to know exactly how I feel until I see the second part. There's some things with the story here and how the Wicked Witch of the West is treated, and I don't know. There's complications here on how I feel about things that I have faith will probably be paid off well with the second half. Number 38, we have We Live in Time. And this is a film that I really didn't have a whole lot of interest in. And it's really just the fact that I love Andrew Garfield and Florence Pugh as performers that I gave this a shot. And I was mildly surprised at this one because it's a movie that kind of dives into the nature of relationships, the good and the bad, but even more so, it's a movie that kind of sneaks up on you by the third act. It's told out of sequence, and there's not seemingly any rhyme or reason to the sequence you're being shown. Like you're just scattershot, different points in their lives of these two people throughout their relationship. And as you get to the end of the movie, at least for me, it started to become clear why it was so unclear and why it was so seemingly random, the events that we were seeing here. And it's because that's kind of how your brain operates. You don't have like this sequential order of events as you're thinking back on them. You think of something that was 2 years ago, and then a random thought from 10 years ago pops into your head, and then a random memory from 7 years ago pops in. And so I thought that was actually kind of subtly brilliant the way that they did that here. I also think that Andrew Garfield and Florence Pugh just have amazing chemistry. I've seen a number of interviews with them after this film, and they just seem like the best of friends, and they're very funny to watch play off of each other. So they absolutely rise this to a new level just because they are so good with each other. I really want to see them do something else. So that is absolutely a reason to check this out as well, if you're just a fan of those actors as I am. And something that really is the thing that stuck with me about this movie that I do want to talk about. It's going into spoilers somewhat. I mean, with a movie like this, you can see the writing on the wall of where things are going. They don't hide it from you. They pretty much tell you from the beginning of the movie what type of story this is going to be. But if you don't want to know anything specific about the ending of this movie, just move on to the next segment. But the way that this movie ends, the final scene between Andrew Garfield and his daughter after Florence Pugh has passed away from cancer really choked me up, really got me emotional out of nowhere, because there's a scene earlier on in the film, basically after they have their first night together, way back when they meet, where she's making breakfast and he's asking questions about why she breaks the egg into a separate bowl, because she's a chef in this movie. And she's basically teaching him like why you want to keep the eggs separate, to keep the eggshells away and make sure the egg's fresh and everything before you mix it in together. And it's a scene that just kind of, you pass by it. You assume it's just something to give context to her chefiness. And at the end of the film, he goes out and he picks eggs with his daughter, and they're in the kitchen, and he starts to teach his daughter about this bowl method and is saying the exact same thing that Florence Pugh said when he first met her about why you do this. And my God, I got so choked up and tears came to my eyes because, again, like with the sequential order, it just very subtly snuck up on me how much that rings true to how you remember somebody and how you keep their memory alive. Like, I was extremely close with my grandma. She was basically my mother because my mother was absent in my life. And one of the biggest things that she gave me is this passion for cooking. And so my wife and my kids, unfortunately, never got to meet her. She passed away a little over a year before I met my wife. It's the one thing in life that I really hate. I can't call it a regret because it's not like a decision that I made, but it's the one thing that I wish could have turned out differently. Because as much as I talk about her and I share stories about her, and my family feels like they know her, they never got to meet her. And this final scene just really reminded me of, like, kind of unintentionally, I think I've kept her memory alive and I've kept her spirit in my family by the way that I cook certain things and with certain dishes that I make. Like, just last night I was making this potato soup that I make during the wintertime. That's easily like top 3, one of my family's favorite meals that I make. And that's something that my grandma made. And I had that same connection with it. And she never actually taught me how to make it. I had to figure it out as an adult, and I ended up nailing it. And I've since just made it every single year. And so just something about this final scene where he's just showing her how to separate eggs. It grabbed a hold of my fucking heart, and it's a movie that on its surface seems like it's just another one of those movies, but it has so much more heart to it and so much more power to it that it really impacted me and stuck with me. So I recommend checking this one out. It's a movie that's certainly it's focusing on kind of a downer subject, but to me the way that they explore that subject is very hopeful. And it doesn't end up being a drag to watch or a depressing movie to watch. It ends up being kind of an uplifting movie to watch, despite the dark fate of one character that they never really shield you from. Number 37 is Carry On. This was another really good one that came out this year for Netflix, and it's essentially one of those throwback movies that came out in the 90s that was like a Die Hard ripoff. We had like a subgenre in the 90s of Die Hard on a blank. Like Speed was Die Hard on a bus. You had Under Siege that was Die Hard on a ship. Under Siege 2, Die Hard on a train. There was a lot of those types of movies for a while there. And Carry On is kind of like a throwback to that. It's like Die Hard in an airport, where you have Taron Egerton playing this TSA agent. You have Jason Bateman playing a really good villain here as this terrorist that's trying to get this device through TSA and onto a plane. And so he essentially has to take a hold of Taron Egerton's life to try to force him to bypass this security check to get him where he wants to go. So it's a really solid throwback action thriller. It's not something that's like on the level of Die Hard or even on the level of something like Speed, but for somebody that loves those types of movies and is glad that some people are still making movies like this, but it was entertaining. It was solidly thrilling, and I enjoyed it. I actually watched it twice, and so this is one that I would like to see more movies like this if they're done on this level. Entertaining, simple, straight to the point. 36, we have Strange Harvest, Occult Murder in the Inland Empire. I know that's a long title. You can just call it Strange Harvest. This has yet to be released. They have not found a distributor yet, but this was one of the more interesting films that I saw at Fantastic Fest this year. It's basically a mockumentary. It's like you're watching a real-time documentary, a true crime documentary on somebody like the Zodiac Killer, but the killer in this movie has a bit of a supernatural edge to him. So the whole film is told almost as if they're retelling real events that are obviously fictional events. So the actors are playing cops and witnesses and victims, recanting the details of this investigation from years prior, and there's CCTV footage and everything put together. A lot of people said it was like a found footage film. I don't think that quite says it, but there's a bit of that flavor in here. It's a fake documentary of a serial killer that is a fictional character. So it was really well done. If you like serial killer documentaries, this is very much along the lines of that, gives you that exact same experience, just with some supernatural edge in there. 35 is Love Lies Bleeding. This is a film that I really did not enjoy the way that it wrapped up. The last 5 minutes or so dropped it quite a bit. If it had ended in a way that wasn't so jarring and off-putting for me, this probably would be at least 15 spots higher. Because I really like movies like this. It's like a gritty, noir, white trash thriller. And so you have these two lovers. One of them is a bodybuilder. One of them is like the manager of this gym, and her father's played by a very scumbaggy Ed Harris, who he's great at playing those types of characters. And Ed Harris is like a crime boss. So I don't want to say too much about what happens. It's very gritty, it's bloody, it's dark, it's nasty. But at the very end, it gets very metaphorical with its visuals, and it just was too much for me. They kind of set it up a little bit throughout the movie, but I feel like they could have still paid off what they were doing visually with this bodybuilder character's like, muscles popping out and like almost like a light transformation scenes without going quite as balls out as they did. So one of those art house things that just doesn't operate on my wavelength. So liked it, could have loved it. 34, we got Mr. Crockett, and this is one that seems to be a love or hate type film. It's definitely not the best version of itself, or again, this is a film that could have been easily another 15 spots higher, but I really like the concept and I really like the character, and I do want to see more in this franchise. You have a character here who's essentially like a mix between Freddy Krueger and Mr. Rogers, where he is this, old children's television show and the kids get infatuated with it. And if the parent ends up being an abusive parent, an absent parent, or, gets a little bit too rough with the kids, Mr. Crockett comes out of the TV, kills the parent and kidnaps the kid and brings him back to his happy world. So it's a very wild movie. It's hard R with the gore and the practical effects of the gore, which are great. I liked some of the puppet designs with like some of his animal friends and the animated chairs and things that are in his TV show. And then when you see like the actual world, it's like a satanic version of all of them. The issue with the film is that it just feels like they need to work on the script quite a bit more, because they had a great concept here for like a short film, and that's actually what this was derived from, was a Mr. Crockett short. But to get it to feature length, it felt like they didn't quite have enough meat there and had to cheat along the way. There's literally a character that suddenly just has a unexplained psychic connection just so she can get the information they need to get from point A to point B. And there's just little stuff like that where it's like, man, if you had just focused on that and figured out something a little bit better, this movie could have been significantly higher. Number 33, Late Night with the Devil, a film that I imagine as time goes on and as I rewatch it will probably grow in my favor. This is a film that I actually had to watch twice before I reviewed it. And I like what they went for here. I'm not a big found footage guy, but I like the spin here where it's found footage, but it's like recycled or rediscovered footage of this old 70s TV show. So you're getting the last episode of this show, but they're also splicing in some true crime documentary flavor in there in the intro. They're putting all the black and white behind the scenes footage whenever they're off the air in between commercials. And it's a really cool concept that I think they execute very well. David Desmalchian is great. I just really dig the concept. I just think in the third act, they lose me a bit. Some of the practical effects are almost too goofy, a little bit too silly looking for my taste, and then they ramp up the CGI effects too that just felt off-putting as well. So if they were able to wrap up this movie without going so crazy over the top campy for a segment there, I think I would have enjoyed it a lot more. But even as is, I did really dig what they were doing here, and I would not mind seeing other movies try to do this type of template of a found footage film in their own way. 32 is going to be A Real Pain. This is the second film directed by Jesse Eisenberg. I think maybe he wrote it as well, but he's also one of the main stars, and you have Kieran Culkin in here. And essentially, they're two cousins who their grandma passed away, and so they are going to Poland to bury her, to visit her grave, to visit her old house. And along the way, they're going on like this guided tour through a lot of historic events and historic landmarks involved with World War II. So there are two Jews going to Poland that are kind of re-experiencing World War II events. And I wasn't really sure what to expect from this one. I didn't see Jesse Eisenberg's first film. Of course, I like him as an actor, although I feel like I get kind of the same performance out of him in a lot of movies. And Kieran Culkin, I don't have a ton of experience with. And they both were damn good in this. I think Kieran Culkin gives one of the best performances of the year, and certainly a performance on a level that I really want to check out more that this guy has done. No, I have not seen the TV show Succession, that I know he's wildly successful in, has gotten Emmys and stuff. But I loved what he did. And then Jesse Eisenberg, for most of this movie, I was like, yeah, he's kind of doing the Jesse Eisenberg thing. And then he actually gets very good at one scene in particular where he has to kind of break down and get emotional. And so even he kind of surprised me a bit. And even on a story level, I just enjoyed what this movie overall ends up being, which is like you coming to terms with your differences of family, being wildly different people, but still loving each other, still celebrating your differences, not wanting that person to change, even though they are kind of conflicting with your views and how you decide to live life, which is certainly something we can all pretty much relate to with our family. And so if you enjoy movies like that, if that sounds like something that you're interested in, I'd recommend you checking it out, if nothing else, because you get two of the better performances of the year here. 31 is A Quiet Place Day One. I'm a huge fan of the first two Quiet Place films, so I was very much looking forward to this, and I enjoyed it, but it's easily my least favorite of the three. This is a prequel, a side story, whatever you want to call it, of completely different characters on the day of the invasion. And the thing that I enjoyed about this is that The movie, at first, you're a little disappointed when you find out the main plot of this is two characters after the city has been decimated, basically trying to survive until they find this old pizzeria in New York so that the one character can have hopefully one last slice of pizza that is tied very much to her childhood before, the world presumably ends. And you're like, really? Is that all we're doing here? And then you think about it for a second and you're like, if the world was ending or if I felt like my life was coming to an end, things like that is what I would focus on. I would want to have one last slice of pizza from my favorite pizzeria. I would want to watch my favorite movie one more time. I would want to go and, do something that I used to do as a kid. Like it felt kind of subtly very touching to me as it started to develop. And so I liked that. I liked the two characters. There's definitely some thrilling sequences in here. These death angels, as I guess they're being called, are really cool creatures. The disappointment that I had is that I just didn't like these characters quite as much as the family in the first two films, but even more so, I feel like if we're going to go back to day one, if we're going to do a side story, if we're going to branch off and do spinoffs, I want to know more about these death angels. I want to know more about the event, about them landing on Earth. I want to learn more about, if nothing else, how the Earth figured out that they operate based off of sound and you got to be quiet to survive. You don't really get any of that here. Like they land, there's a bunch of chaos. Lupita Nyong'o gets knocked out. She wakes up and suddenly everybody just knows. They're like the mystery's gone. So for me, it just kind of felt like, what's the point if we're not going to dive a little bit more into that stuff? I don't need to know everything, but I want to know a little bit more. Number 30 is Never Let Go, the Alexandre Aja film with Halle Berry. I saw this technically at its world premiere, but it played like an hour after the general public was able to see it. So a little bit strange, but was still a cool experience. And I like this movie a lot more than most. I really enjoy the dynamic here between Halle Berry and her two sons. Reminds me a lot of this movie Frailty that I'm a massive fan of. I think the movie's effectively creepy. And at first, it's kind of run-of-the-mill. You're like, okay, this is kind of going through the motions of what I figured this story would go. And then you have something that happens that is like wildly out of nowhere. And you're like, holy shit, now what? And so the second half of the film very much kind of went against my expectations, and I was very hooked in. I like the fact that the movie is not very committed to giving answers or to pointing us in a direction of where the answers are. It just kind of presents you with this storyline, presents you with these questions, and you can take what you want from it. And I had a multitude of conversations with people at this festival of how they interpreted the film, and they were all different, and all of them very plausible. If you're raising intriguing questions and you're not being annoyingly ambiguous, I dig that. So I enjoyed this one. I guess I'm on an island with it being one of my favorite horror films of the year. 29 is Twisters. I guess I'm on an island with not being a massive fan of the original. I was a kid when that came out, and it was certainly fun to see in the theaters, but watching it at home, I've never felt it was a very good movie. Certainly entertaining, a product of its time, but never been on the Twisters train. So then you have this sequel come out that is ignoring the original film for the most part, brand new characters, but with modern CGI. And I figured if nothing else, it'd probably be just a dumb, fun, entertaining summer movie. And that's exactly what it is. And that's exactly what it's going for. Like, you have people that drill their trucks into the ground so that they can sit there and crank country music while the fucking tornado goes over them. Like, the movie knows exactly what type of movie it is. It knows exactly what the audience is wanting from this. And I actually found this to be more entertaining and a little bit better of a movie than the original. I don't know how hot of a take that is, but as far as Twister movies goes, I had more fun with this one. So it gave me what I wanted. It's not necessarily a film that I'm going to watch over and over, but I had a good time. 28 is A Different Man, one of the more interesting films this year, and certainly a showcase for how outstanding of an actor Sebastian Stan is, as well as The Apprentice. Much as I don't like that movie, it's another great showcase for how great of an actor he is. So the premise here is a little hard to describe without feeling like you're detailing the entire first two acts of the film, but you have a character who has facial deformities. He's got this condition where he has tumors that grow on his face, and so he's cripplingly insecure. He doesn't have very good interactions. He has no self-confidence, and it basically prevents him from attaining any goal that he goes after, whether it's in his personal life, his professional life. And he is approached with this experimental procedure that can help this, and miraculously, it just takes away all of his facial deformities, and now he looks like Sebastian Stan. So we pick up with him later on this like the first act of the film. We pick up with him after that has happened, and he's now this different man, and now he's able to achieve all these things because he's got this self-confidence of being this handsome son of a bitch. And then out of nowhere, he's in a crossroads where now this thing that he wants to achieve, he's probably not going to be able to, because somebody else that has the same exact condition that he used to have comes into the fray, but he's completely self-confident. He has all the confidence in the world. He does not let that cripple him, is going to take that opportunity away from him. So it's a very interesting movie. It's darkly comedic. It's got outstanding performances. It raises a lot of interesting questions. And so it's not something I would ever probably rewatch. If I rewatch it, it would be, every 5 or 6 years, if anything. It's not a rewatchable film, but it's a very interesting and impactful film that I appreciated. Number 27 is Speak No Evil, the biggest surprise of the year for me, because I expected this thing to suck for multitudes of reasons. I'm not a big fan of the original film. I had no faith in Blumhouse doing an American remake of this. Blumhouse had a horrible track record of all their releases this year leading up to Speak No Evil, and I ended up really enjoying this one. I actually do prefer this to the original. I'm not going to argue with you that the original is more impactful. It's bolder. It's a lot more gritty. It's certainly more memorable. It goes for it. But this one is something that's much more enjoyable for me to watch, and I can get a lot more out of this one because the first one is just such a grim, miserable experience that I will never revisit that film. James McAvoy is great. I like the changes that they made. And I even think the fact that the third act is a wildly different direction makes this one of those remakes that actually you can be a fan of the original and be a fan of the remake as just like alternate realities of each other. So I dug this one. It was very surprising. Number 26 is Roadhouse. Just a good old-fashioned good time. It's dumb as fuck. It is absolutely over the top and ridiculous, but you know what? I enjoy that sometimes. I'm not a huge fan of the original Roadhouse, but I've always liked it. I don't necessarily have a ton of nostalgia for it, but them saying they were going to do a Roadhouse remake with Doug Liman directing and Jake Gyllenhaal as the star, I always thought that sounded like it could be a pretty good idea. The one thing about the remake I didn't necessarily love is they get rid of a lot of the bar bouncer culture that was such a mainstay in the original film, and this is much more of just kind of like a modern action flick. But it's rated R, it's bloody, it's pretty breakneck with a lot of the fighting. I think that Jake Gyllenhaal does a great job in the role, and I even think that Conor McGregor, despite the fact that he was clearly going off and doing 8 balls between every single take, I think that he fits the movie. His ridiculous, obnoxiously over-the-top villain actually kind of works here. So I like the fact that this was successful and they're going to do a sequel because I had fun with it. 25, you have Hitman. This is, I guess, the best streaming service movie this year. Let me check that really quick. Yeah, the best movie that I saw that went straight to streaming. And this is Linklater, the guy who gave us Dazed and Confused and Boyhood and School of Rock, teaming up with Glenn Powell. And this is, if nothing else, a showcase for how much star power Glenn Powell has and how good of a career he's about to have. Because essentially he's playing like 30 different characters in this movie, all with different, comedic tones and seriousness and dramatic quality. It's a play on what is supposedly a real story about this guy who was embodying these different characters to essentially be like a snitch for the FBI, to get people to let their guard down and incriminate themselves. So it's a film where he's playing all these different characters, but then gets tied in with this woman who has criminal ties and falls in love with her. And it just goes in some really wild and interesting directions. So I had a lot of fun with this one. It wasn't as laugh out loud funny as I was hoping it would be, as I was expecting it would be after the praise, but it was still just a really fun, enjoyable movie that certainly makes Glenn Powell somebody that had a hell of a year, and we're going to see him do a lot more stuff. 24 is Bone Lake. This is another one that has yet to be released wide. I think they're still looking for some distributors for this one as well. Saw it at Fantastic Fest, and this is basically Speak No Evil, but the horny version. This is the erotic version. You have 2 couples that come to this Airbnb at the same exact day. They've been double booked, and they get along right away, so they say, hey, let's just share this, try to have a good weekend instead of one of us fucking off and probably not finding anything. And not too soon after that, one of the couples starts to get very uncomfortable with their interactions. They start to break social cues. They start to get a little bit too seductive and sexually aggressive with what they're saying and doing. And so it just becomes this really entertaining situation where you're not necessarily like thinking that something bad's going to happen to them, but you're like, oh my God, like, are they going to have an affair? Are they going to start fucking each other? Like, what is the end game here? What is going on? And it's just thoroughly entertaining. It's a very funny movie. And by the third act, it absolutely pushes into the horror territory with where it goes. So just a thoroughly fun movie that if you like Speak No Evil, definitely keep it on your radar because it was a good time. 23, you got Your Monster. This is a film with Melissa Barrera where it's essentially like a self-discovery movie. You have a girl that had cancer. Her boyfriend broke up with her while she was recovering from cancer at her worst and lowest point in life, and she's basically shattered, and she regains this friendship with the monster that lived in her closet when she was a kid. And it's her friendship, her relationship with this monster that starts to make her take charge of her life, that starts to make her, pull herself up by her bootstraps and start taking no shit from people because she just gets walked all over. Melissa Barrera is outstanding in this. I think that she gets better in every single thing that I see her in, which is awesome to see because I just really like her and I wish for her success. And this is just a really fun movie. It kind of snuck up on me how much I enjoyed this because this is on paper not necessarily something I'd be into, like a love story with a monster and yourself. I was like, okay. It was really just Melissa that made me interested in checking this out. But I had a smile on my face through most of this movie. I got a couple of really good laughs with Melissa Barrera's physical comedy in this. And it does an interesting job of never really committing one way or the other, whether literally she's befriending this monster that's actually real, or this is all just kind of in her head and her subconscious, and it's just kind of her pushing herself to get this way. It kind of leaves both of those open to interpretations, which I enjoyed. The only misstep is that the note that it ends on soured the movie a little bit for me. It felt like it was a little bit too dark for the movie that we were watching. Just didn't quite land the plane in the best way for me. 22, you got Bad Boys Ride or Die. I'm a lifelong Bad Boys fan. I've seen every single one of these movies in the theaters ever since I was a kid. I love Martin Lawrence and Will Smith's chemistry together. And the last film, Bad Boys for Life, I thought was the best one yet. So I had high expectations for this one. It did disappoint me a little bit, but still made it very high on my end of the year list because I love these movies. Buddy cop action films that are over the top and ridiculous, have great action, great comedy. And so this is just my thing. This is a franchise I've always loved. As far as the misstep, I just feel like the humor wasn't as strong in this one as the other three. And a lot of that had to do with them just continuously making Martin Lawrence's character kind of the blunt end of a joke with how silly and how like the woo-saw thing from the second film is still carrying over where he's trying to have like this connection with the universe. And it's like, dude, you shoot people. Like, just stop doing this. This is a running gag that we've been doing for the last 3 movies. It's totally run out of steam. Stop. You're a bad boy, not a fucking monk. 21, The First Omen, another massive surprise this year. A movie that I thought there's no chance this is going to be worth anything. I'm not a fan of horror prequels. The Omen franchise, despite the original being possibly my favorite film of the 70s, as a franchise, I've never thought it was very successful, never thought it even merited having a bunch of sequels and prequels and remakes and everything. And so them yet again going, let's tell the story of how Damien's mom got pregnant. I'm like, I don't give a fuck. Why are we doing this? And you know what? This movie is not only the best Omen film since the original, it actually makes the original film a little bit better. It's one of those rare prequels that actually focuses on things, that adds things to the original film. It adds context to this satanic cult, these group of people, and what their ultimate plan with Damien is. And so I was so appreciative of that. It's not just a film trying to bank on the name. They actually have a purpose. They do a good job bringing back the Final Destination Omen kills here. The central performance by Nell Tiger Free, I believe is her name, is really good. The only part of the movie I didn't like, honestly, is the last little tail end of it, like almost like the post-credit scene where they almost tease like they're going to do more First Omen movies, and it's like, stop. You put the story that just ran right into the original Omen seamlessly, perfectly. Why would you even go beyond that? Why are you even thinking about going beyond that? Stop. So if you were like me and thought, no, I'm not wasting my time with that, spend your time on it because it's actually worth it. Number 20, we have Inside Out 2. Pixar, I actually have not watched very many of their films ever since they have all gone to streaming. I've heard there's some great ones, but I don't know. Pixar is always kind of a theatrical experience to me, so I've missed out on quite a bit. But Inside Out was the last movie that they made that I thought was genuinely great, so I was looking forward to this one. And it didn't disappoint. I think it's as good, if not maybe a little bit better than the original. I liked all the new characters, especially Anxiety. I thought that Maya Hawke did a great job with that one. And just very well written to go from a little girl and her personalities to now being this teenager who has even more of these emotions inside of her that develop as you get older, like anxiety, and her kind of trying to navigate teenage drama and teenage angst and wanting to be the captain of the team and wondering if she's going to be friends with this person and all that. I just think it's a really well done concept. So if you love the first one, I'm sure you'll love the second one. Me and my family certainly did. Number 19 is Long Legs. This is a throwback to 90s serial killer thrillers like Silence of the Lambs, Seven, Bone Collector, things like that. Some of my favorite movies of all time and a subgenre that I didn't realize how much I missed. So I hope, if nothing else, this brings more movies like this. It shows that there's actually a demand for it. This is a film that was a huge victim of overhype, but luckily I stayed away from a lot of that. I never watched a trailer. I didn't look at any of the reviews or any of the out-of-theater reactions for any of the test screenings or theater or press screenings, excuse me. So I walked into this one mostly blind. Wasn't expecting the scariest movie of the year like a lot of other people were, unfortunately. And I dug what they went for here. I think that it's effectively creepy. The way that they shoot this and the cinematography and the way that they're framing characters, there's so much void space in every single frame that I was anxious throughout almost the entire film, like darting around, waiting for something to jump out. It just kind of has you in that sense of unease throughout the whole movie, and I thought that was brilliant because it's just done with the camera work. I thought that Nicolas Cage, 80% of what he was doing was great and creepy and just wildly entertaining, and 20% of it was like too far into the Nick Cage territory for me. The singing scene and when he's losing his shit in the car, I was like, I kind of cringed a little bit. I was like, this is not scary. This is too much. You know, dial back the Cageisms to about 11. They're on like 18 right now. And Micah Monroe, I always like her. So this is a film that was certainly interesting and could really go up or down quite a bit based off of how it plays on a rewatch, because I've only seen it once so far. Number 18 was a big punching bag movie that I highly enjoyed, and that is Salem's Lot. This is a film that was stuck on a shelf for a number of years, felt like we almost were never going to see it, and then it got put out on Max this year, and for an old school vampire spook fest, I thought that it did a really good job. Now, I love vampire films, so I'm easier to please than most. But what they went for here with the visuals, with the tone, with kind of trimming down a very large book and a very large miniseries to be a little bit more of a streamlined experience, I just really dug what they were doing. I do wish that we could see the hour longer version of this film. You can watch this and tell that they just cut things left and right, and I do want to see the more fleshed out version. But even for this shorter version, certainly agree with that as a major flaw, but I didn't think the movie deserved near the amount of hate that it got. So I like this one. Don't think we're ever going to see the director's cut, but I sure hope we do. 17 is going to be If. This is a movie that came out I had no interest in. I thought the trailers looked terrible. And when I eventually did go see this weeks later with my kids, the internet had already decided that it was a big disappointment. So I just had nothing but low expectations for this, and it really surprised me. A lot like a couple other movies I've talked about on here, it sneaks up on you with how much emotion and how much it just draws out of you with its storyline. You know, it's kind of a throwback to family films that weren't afraid to tackle some darker subject matter and talk a little bit more about the nature of life and not make everything so glossy. And you have this little girl that teams up with Ryan Reynolds trying to basically find a place for all these displaced imaginary friends who their humans have gone on and have stopped imagining things and have gone on to adulthood. And just little things here and there, like a scene where they find one of these people that used to be friends with one of these imaginary friends who has gone into adulthood and still needs the help of that imaginary friend, still needs somebody to kind of pat him on the back and tell him he's going to do a good job and everything's going to be okay. Scenes like that, or, you know, where the movie ultimately goes in the third act. It's thoroughly entertaining and silly enough to appeal to kids, but there's enough that's like adult themes and enough that's really emotionally effective in there to touch adults as well. So I enjoyed this one. I didn't get why everybody said it was so terrible. I thought that it was actually surprisingly good for how bad the trailers were. 16 is What You Wish For. Now, this played at last year's Fantastic Fest, but I wasn't able to get into a screening for it, and so it came out like in June or July, and I checked this out just because it had stayed on my radar. I like these foodie restaurant industry movies that Fantastic Fest tends to play every year. And this was just a wild ride, especially if you don't know anything about it, which I didn't. You got Nick Stahl here as this struggling chef, and he is called out to this private island by a friend of his who is also a chef, and he is wildly successful. He works for this company where he provides these immaculate dinners for all of the elite and the rich. And through a series of events, Nick Stahl ends up switching places with him and then has to provide a dinner for all these rich people. And that's all I'm going to tell you, because everything else that it does is just wild and crazy and depraved. And it was just a really, really wicked movie that has seriously stuck with me throughout the year and has kind of gone completely overlooked, which is another reason why I like putting it this high and shining a spotlight on it. Number 15 is Maxine, the conclusion of the X trilogy that I was really looking forward to. This was my most anticipated horror film of the year, and I really enjoyed what they ended up doing here. It's definitely a divisive film. It seems like it disappointed more than it did not, but for me, it gave me everything that I wanted. I really liked the style of it, going back to the 80s, but not kind of focusing on the glam of the 80s, focusing on like the dirtiness of that era, having the satanic panic and being like the backdrop of all of that, and very much tying into the themes of the movie. I thought Mia Goth was great in this. It doesn't have like a ton of kills, but when it does, it's certainly pretty gory and effective. And I like the visual style of it, playing off a lot of Italian horror films. And by the end of it, I totally agree with everybody that says that the reveals are way too predictable, because I don't even think it was the beginning of this movie that tipped me off. It was the end of X that tipped me off. So I always kind of knew where this was going to go. Maybe that's why it didn't disappoint me, because I just expected it. But even more so than the reveal of the killer, which I get is for a lot of people the main point of a murder mystery. To me, this was more about that era and that theme of parents or other people trying to like stifle the interests of the youth, which at the time was porn and heavy metal music and slasher films. And so that satanic panic background very much is something that plays hard into what I grabbed out of this movie, about what I thought the point of the movie was. So for me, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I got everything I wanted out of it, but I get it wasn't for everybody. Number 14, you have Transformers 1, another film like If that I thought the trailers were just trash. I was like, why would we do this? Why are we making an animated Transformers film? Why do we need another origin story? The humor looks terrible. This is going to suck. And I just went to go see this with my kids because we were picking up my son from work and we had a couple hours to kill. So we just watched this before we had to pick him up. And I was shocked at how much I enjoyed this. This ended up being easily my favorite Transformers film. Not that that's a high bar. I've always enjoyed the first Michael Bay film. I enjoyed Bumblebee. I thought that the Beast Wars one that came out last year was decent. But to me, this is like the Transformers movie that they should have always made. And it's a movie that's actually focused on the Transformers. Who knew that was going to make for an interesting story? So I thought they did a great job. It was just horribly, horribly mismarketed. Number 13, probably the one that I'm going to get the most shit for in this list, if last year an Oppenheimer were any indication. Number 13 is Dune Part 2. I know this is easily number one by a landslide for a ton of people. And to be fair, I just have not had the interest or the time to give this a second watch. I'm sure when I watch Dune Part 2 and follow it immediately with, Dune Part 1 and then follow it immediately with Dune Part 2, the movie's going to play a little bit better for me. Obviously, it's 13 out of 130, so this is very fucking high. I don't know why I have to defend myself at putting it at 13, but I know I will. Visually, it's one of the most outstanding movies ever made. I mean, the visual effects here are immaculate. It's got outstanding cinematography. It's sci-fi epic brilliance. A lot of great performances and great characters. There's a nice comedic edge in here with a few of the characters, namely Javier Bardem, that I got a lot of enjoyment out of. It certainly follows the story, like it follows the source material to a T, which I'm not familiar with the source material, but that is something I like to give a thumbs up to, because too often a lot of properties like to just dispense of the source material and the fans' attachment to it and do their own thing. So very faithful adaptation of this story. The issue that I had with this was that it just didn't engage me as much as the introduction to this world that we had in the first part. And I know that I'm on an island with that. And also, I walked into this with the expectation that this was the conclusion of the storyline, that Dune was going to be cut into 2 parts. And this is very much a middle chapter. Dune Prophecy, or Dune, whatever the third one that's going to be coming out in a few years, is actually going to be the culmination, the conclusion of this. And so all throughout this movie, I was looking forward to seeing so much of these things paid off and concluded. And when he got to the end, and it was very clear, like all we did is like set up even more things to be answered, even more things to explore, my expectations kind of fucked me a bit, because I walked out bummed out and frustrated that I just spent another 3 hours in this world, and I still have so many questions and just feel so uneasy about where things went. So it's just one of those times where I just didn't quite fall in love with this on the level that everybody else did. Maybe a rewatch will fix that. Time will tell. I just could not find the time to give it that second watch, but still a movie that I get the hype for it. I think that it's outstanding. It's very high on my list. Just not my favorite of the year. Number 12 is going to be Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. I adore the trilogy of the Caesar Apes films. This is continuing off of that, so I was pretty sure I was going to love this as long as they didn't really fall on their face with a brand new director, and I thought he did a really good job. Now, you don't have a character that is on the gripping level that Caesar was in the original trilogy, at least not yet. But what you do have here that I really appreciated is expanding and exploring this world of the post-Caesar Planet of the Apes, where you have the teachings and the words and the wisdom of Caesar getting spun by different groups in different ways, one using him as almost like a Christ figure, the other one manipulating his words to use to have almost like this dictatorship. And so it very much mirrored real life and how the words of like religion especially gets spun and gets manipulated by different people and how they interpret it and how they decide to use those words. So all of that I thought was awesome. The CGI here, the facial and the motion tracking and everything that they do is, again, industry standard, basically. It sucks that there's not like a category for that. There's not enough movies that use it, unfortunately, that all of what Andy Serkis did for those movies went without any kind of awards consideration, but that is continuing to be outstanding. And it leaves off in a point where I'm very excited and intrigued for what is going to happen and how this is likely going to tie in with the events of the original Planet of the Apes film at some point, whether it's going to actually have that movie as canon or remake it to a certain degree. It's a movie that reintroduces us to this world, sets up a lot of characters, sets up a lot of conflicts, gives us context to how those 3 movies have expanded over into this, and leaves us in a place where I'm excited for more. Can't really ask for a whole lot more. I had a great time with it. Can't wait to see what's next. Number 11, you have The Wild Robot, and this was another pretty big surprise for me. I always thought it looked good, but it's a movie that I probably wouldn't have been in a huge hurry to go see if I even saw it in theaters. But this was one of the films that oddly played at Fantastic Fest, which just felt strange from the moment that they announced it. So we went to go check this out, and this was surprisingly heartfelt, and a movie that really focuses on parenthood and sacrifice and all these things that really resonate with me. So not only is it just beautiful animation, it's a really beautiful story. So I've watched this at home with my kids since then. My wife loved it. My youngest daughter loved it. It's the animated film that I loved the most in 2024. Finally, we've arrived at the top 10. Now, I do have a standalone top 10 video where I'm going to talk a lot more about these movies. I'm going to go through them a little bit quicker here because I've been talking for a very long time. But number 10 for me is another movie that really surprised me, and that is My Old Ass. This is a film that was not really on my hype radar. It wasn't something that I heard a whole lot of people talking about. I heard people say it was good, but it wasn't really a movie that was breaking through the mold of all the other films that were released recently. But it had an intriguing premise. A girl, a teenager, who's about to leave home to go to college, through a series of events, is able to communicate with her 20-year-older self. And so that's always kind of been a scenario that people talk about. Like, if you could go back in time and tell your teenage self something, what would you say? Like, would you tell them to avoid this? Would you tell them to make sure you do this? Would you change anything? Would you want to alter your life? Would you want to alter your past and come out different on the other end? And so it's just a really intriguing time travel-y kind of premise that I really enjoy. And for the most of this movie, I was enjoying it, but it's very much kind of a coming-of-age teenage girl movie, and obviously I was not a teenage girl, so there's a lot of things that they're exploring here where I'm like, okay, I can't necessarily resonate with that, but I'm still having a good time. And then by the third act, when you get context given to why Aubrey Plaza, who is playing the 20-year-old version of this girl, told her younger self certain things, told her what to do and what not to do, when it gives context to that, it kind of recontextualizes the movie on this conversation of the value of being this older, more careful, more guarded person versus being the more free-spirited and perhaps ignorant, youthful person. And oftentimes we always say, like, wisdom comes with age, experiences in life and regrets and bad decisions and mistakes makes you smarter, makes you be a lot more careful, a lot more guarded. But this is a movie that kind of gives all the power back to the youth and saying, being free-spirited and throwing caution to the wind and doing things that may not be the best thing in the long run, but are going to have a lot of good things that come with it. The not giving a fuck of being young and being a lot more wild has just as much value as being careful. And, there's other things that tie into it too. I don't want to talk too much about how the movie plays out, but it just ended up being a lot more profound of a story by the end of it than I was expecting or that I felt like it was doing for the first two acts. So it ended up being something that was very impactful, was very enjoyable, was a very fun movie to watch. And much like with We Live in Time, is dealing with some subject matter that could very easily have been a downer, but they do it in such a hopeful way that it spins it in a way that I really enjoyed it. So this is a big surprise coming in at number 10. Number 9 is Cuckoo. I saw this premiere at the opening film of Overlook Film Festival, and I've loved it ever since. It's bizarre, it's fucking weird and strange and out there and unique. You have great performances in here. You have some of the best, if not the best, scares of the year for me personally, for my taste. And so despite this being a film that's very much a love or hate thing, there's people that are going to have this at the bottom of the list for the year. I love what they did. It's my number 9. Number 8, we have Nosferatu, a film that I was sure was going to be very well made, but I was not sure if it was going to be on my wavelength or not, because Robert Eggers is extreme hit or miss when it comes to that. I think he's an outstanding filmmaker that has a wildly unique style and executes his type of movies very well, but what he does either really works for me or really does not. And so this ended up being a film that luckily I enjoyed as much as I respected. I think that it is visually the best looking film of the year, and that's a tall order. I mean, you got things like Dune Part 2, just a couple spaces below this, that is a huge contender for that. But visually, I thought this movie was outstanding. It got this nightmarish quality to it that I thought was intoxicating. It's got this really interesting gray and blue color grading that gives the vibe of an old school black and white film. The cinematography is outstanding here. The performances are all outstanding. You got Lily Rose Depp that just goes for it and gives this performance that's going to define her career for a very long time. You got Bill Skarsgård that just literally escapes into Count Orlok in a way where if you did not know the actor who was playing him, there's no fucking way you'd be able to guess. Like, it's just wild. I listened to interviews of him about how he trained with opera singers and figured out how to bring the voice from like down in his chest cavity and stuff. And it's like, dude, how the fuck do you do that? Like, I just want to listen to this guy for an hour talk about how he created this character. The makeup design is outstanding. So it's a film that on first watch, I appreciated all of that. But the story was like, it feels like the story I've seen 1,000 times. This is just the run-of-the-mill Bram Stoker's Dracula with a few tweaks. And on second watch, I was able to follow the film and follow the themes and follow the journey between Lily Rose Depp's character and Count Orlok a lot closer, and ended up really getting into and enjoying that, the approach that Eggers took with those two characters, and having this be, a little lustful, but also like darkly tragic and somewhat a love story in a really fucked up way. So by the end of the second watch, I appreciated this movie and enjoyed it significantly more. Ended up being one of my favorites of the year. Number 7, we got Terrifier 3. I was not an instant fan of this franchise when the first one came out, and I loved the second film, and I loved this third film. It gave me everything that I wanted. I think that they're just an absolute blast to watch, despite how depraved they are, despite how much they push the envelope. I really enjoyed the vintage Christmas aesthetic and setting. I think that Lauren Lavera just continues to get better as Sienna. I think that David Howard Thornton continues to get better as Art the Clown and all of his depraved hijinks. It's just a movie that, if you like what Terrifier delivers, it's arguably the best for a lot of people, while I still have a little bit of love for the second one that holds that out as my favorite. But Terrifier 3 is so damn close that I'm not sure which one's my favorite. That's how good it was. Number 6 is Alien Romulus, another film that's kind of love or hate this year. You either really like what they did and bringing back the vibe of the first two films and putting a lot of nostalgia in there and kind of getting us back to the glory days, the approach of those first couple films, or you felt like it was way too derivative, had no new ideas, and you just really like things like Prometheus and what Ridley Scott was doing and being very different. And I understand all aspects of responses to this film. But as somebody who adores the first two films and has spent my entire life waiting for somebody to kind of get back to that and reset us back to that type of film, to me, this knocked it out of the park with that. I definitely could have done without a lot of the nostalgia, without a lot of the remember berries. I don't need the callback lines. I don't need the deep fake character. Definitely went too far with all of that, but it did not tank the movie at all for me. I still had a hell of a time for it and really looking forward to seeing how Fede follows this up. Coming at number 5, we have The Substance, probably the most powerful, the most impactful horror film this year. I think it's easily the best body horror film that's been released in my lifetime. It's got all the nasty practical effects, over-the-top gore for all of us sickos, all of us horror fans, our carnage candy fiends. And yet you have a film that is so powerful and so well done and so matter-of-fact with its message and its commentary, and not in a way that feels like somebody's beating you over the head with something, just feels like really making a strong point. And so it's a movie that is transcended just being a huge treat for us horror fans to being something that actually has the potential to win a lot of major awards this year. We already saw Demi Moore walk away with the Golden Globe for Best Actress. I am pulling for her to win that same award in a lot of these other ceremonies. It would be an awesome thing to see. We don't get recognized very much as horror fans. This genre tends to be overlooked way more times than not. So having a movie like this that is so awesome, thoroughly entertaining, and absolutely just sick and over the top, but still finding a way to penetrate all of the pretentious award stuff, it's awesome to see. Coming at number 4 is Anora, one of the funniest movies that I have seen in the last number of years. It's basically the Cinderella story. It's the pretty woman with a little bit more of a comedic edge here, a little bit more of a wild hijinks edge going on. You have a sex worker and the Cinderella story, where she marries this really rich Russian kid, and the family does not appreciate that and tries to annul the marriage, and just tons of hijinks ensue. I think that it's got right up there with Demi Moore. Honestly, I wouldn't be upset if Mikey Madison takes away the Best Actress Oscar. I think they're both equally deserving for different reasons, but an outstanding central performance with her, outstanding supporting performances from everybody else, and a movie that just surprises you in so many ways. The first act is like all party movie, and then out of nowhere it turns into this crazy hijinks comedy that is just the whole theater rolling the entire time. And then in the third act, the last 10 minutes or so, comes right back in and becomes really gut-wrenching and emotional, kind of out of nowhere, and just leaves you in a spot where you feel so raw, so like conflicted about what you just watched. So very powerful movie that was thoroughly entertaining, and I look forward to checking it out again. Number 3 is Heretic. I love a good religious horror film when it is very smartly written and smartly executed, and unfortunately that's a bit of a rarity. As I said way earlier in this video, I'm a huge fan of the movie Frailty. To me, that is like the smartest religious horror film that we've ever gotten for my taste. Heretic gives it a run for its money. You have exploration here where a character played by Hugh Grant in a best actor level performance that I thought was outstanding, who is so charismatic and funny and charming and equally just fucking creepy. He has lured these 2 Mormon missionaries to his house, locked them inside, and is forcing them to play this game where he is essentially just having conversations. He's presenting facts, he's presenting arguments for why certain religions are possibly fake or, iterations of other things, and they're not what they seem to be. The whole thing is a game to try to shake their faith, and they progress through the game on whether or not they still believe or they're starting to have that faith shaken. And what I loved about the movie, aside from how thoroughly entertaining it was, outstanding performances, how charming and creepy and weird and off-kilter it all is that tightrope that the writers walked, and they were also the directors, of giving a lot of power to these real world insecurities and explanations and doubtful statements towards religion, while giving just as much power to faith and to people who, believe in God and believe in their religion and get a lot of positive things out of that. So to me, I thought it was brilliantly executed. Absolutely loved it. At number 2, we have a film that provided me with some of the most joy that I have felt watching a movie in the theater, not only in 2024, but over the last number of years. And that's Deadpool and Wolverine. I know this is yet another film that a lot of people really did not like. A lot of people have major issues with it. They're tired of the cameo-filled era of comic book films, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. But I think this is an outlier as a film that utilizes that to its strength and actually has a purpose for it, not just, lazily throwing it in there as window dressing. Deadpool and Wolverine, I just had such a great time with. I laughed my ass off throughout the entire film. I loved the chemistry and the on-screen hijinks between Deadpool and Wolverine, Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman. For somebody who was worried about the impact of Hugh Jackman coming back after the brilliant ending of Logan, I loved what they did here. It didn't affect Logan at all to me. Had a lot of fun with the action sequences, the multiple fights between these two characters. Loved how it was hard R for being a Disney movie, and they just went there. They did not shield this. They did not trim this down at all from the craziness of the first two films, which is another worry of mine. And even when you get into things like the cameos, the cameos were so much fun. I think they had a good purpose here. They were a part of the film, where I don't even really think it's accurate to call them cameos. They're just like surprise side characters. So all of that just made for one of the most thoroughly entertaining film experiences that I had in the past couple of years as far as comedy goes, because just hardly any movies genuinely make me laugh anymore on the level of this and Anora. So I had an amazing time with it. I look forward to continuing to rewatch this film. I get people's gripes with it, but this operates under the rules of a comedy for me, and all of that is for naught if you don't make me laugh, and this movie thoroughly made me laugh. And number 1, kind of along the same lines, is Abigail. This has been my favorite film since I saw it at the Overlook Film Festival, and I had a pretty good indication that this was going to stay my number 1, because this is just one of those films that feels like it was made for me. I'm a huge fan of the vampire subgenre. One of my favorite films of all time, what often competes for my number 1 horror film of all time, is The Lost Boys, and you got movies like Fright Night that are way up there too. And this movie is absolutely born out of inspiration from movies like that. And it's just everywhere on screen. So this genuinely feels like the guys at Radio Silence just made this film for me. And I loved every second of it. I loved the premise. I loved all the characters and the actors who portrayed them. I thought they were all so thoroughly entertaining that I didn't even want any of them to die, because I just loved being around them. I thought that Alicia Weir was incredible as Abigail, somebody who's charismatic and fun, but genuinely creepy as this vampire ballerina. It's hard R, and even though they go CGI blood with all the exploding bodies and stuff, it just works for the tone of this film. So I don't really have any other way to explain it. This is just a movie that is absolutely my thing. It delivers everything that I want from movies like this. Silly, fun, over the top, awesome genre vampire films. That's my shit. So Abigail is my shit. This is number 1, has been all year, my favorite film of 2024. Well, we made it, guys. My voice is going out and I still have to edit this thing, but thank you guys so much for an awesome year in 2024. It was yet again the most successful year my channel has seen so far, and I look forward to even besting that in 2025. I hope you guys enjoyed all of the content over the last year. I appreciate everybody who watched through this entire ranking. I know they can be taxing. Just think about my end, how taxing that is. But I appreciate all you guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope we're going to have one hell of another year of awesome movies in 2025. That's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, click over here for all of my 2024 new release reviews if you want my expanded thoughts on all of these, and I'm going to put a playlist of all of the other end of the year rankings if you want to see what was my most surprising, disappointing, all that kind of stuff. Please like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss anything in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.